of the Mayor and TfL about who knew what and when regarding the Crossrail delay after receiving an unsatisfactory response from the Mayor. The EU Exit Working Group has examined what would be the impact of a no-deal Brexit. The Education Panel has visited 2 intervention centres that help excluded centres back into mainstream education. We've issued a summons to London and Partners, the Mayor's promotional company, to see documents relating to its performance and its value for money, and we're working through these now. We've published recommendations as to how TfL can turn around the £1 billion black hole in its finances. Looking ahead to the next mayoral and assembly elections in 2020, the GLA Oversight Committee has questioned Mary Hartley, the GLA's chief officer, on how we can expect the elections to be run when the time comes. This evening, we are looking forward to the inaugural London Youth Assembly. We are proud to be working with the Youth Assembly on the issues that matter to young people who are the future of the capital. We wish them all the best with their first meeting and will continue to support them in the years to come. Item 2, declarations of interest. Would you please note the recommendation set out in item 2? Thank you. Could I ask Assembly members to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interests or other relevant interests where they relate to items on the agenda for today's meeting? None? Thank you. May I ask the Assembly to agree in the minutes of the Mayor's Question Time meeting held on the 19th of October and permit me to sign them as a correct record? Thank you. Could I ask the Assembly to receive the Mayor's report covering the period from the 5th of October 2018 to the 8th of November 2018? Thank you. The Mayor will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes on matters occurring since the publication of his report. Assembly members have submitted 1 request for topics for inclusion within the debate.
Good morning. As colleagues may be aware, overnight there was a serious fire at Orpington bus garage and a number of buses have been damaged. The London Fire Brigade and its fire investigation unit are on the scene. The bus depot fire is now under control. The bus garage is closed and route 358 between Orpington bus garage and Crystal Palace Parade is currently suspended. 3 other routes are on diversion. Chair, this Mayor's Question Time comes during an extraordinary moment for London and for the whole of the country. The news has been dominated by Brexit and we're now facing more uncertainty than ever before. After months of missteps and a litany of missed opportunities, the government has reached a tentative Brexit deal that, in my view, not only risks damaging jobs and growth for the next generation, but is a million miles away from what was promised during the referendum campaign. The proposal for the future trade and relationship also doesn't go anywhere near far enough to protect London's vital services sector and will undoubtedly create huge additional costs for businesses, especially SMEs and public services. Faced with the possibility of the Prime Minister's bad deal or a catastrophic no-deal Brexit, it's now clearer than ever that the British public gets a first say on this deal, with staying in the EU an option on the ballot paper. I'd respectfully encourage all MPs to vote against this agreement, which would hit London hard, damage our public services and make life more difficult for our children and grandchildren and support a people's vote. Since we last met, I've continued to stand up for our city as Mayor and to work on a number of new initiatives to improve the lives of Londoners. These include establishing a new violence reduction unit made up of specialists in health, police and local government, as well as community and youth groups, to lead and deliver a long-term public health approach to tackling the causes of violent crime. Continuing to work with the Met Police Violent Crime Task Force, funded by City Hall, to crack down on violent crime across the city. Launching 5 new low-emission bus zones to tackle London's toxic air. Agreeing a £1 billion plan to build 11,000 new council homes. And leading trade missions to Berlin and Paris to bang the drum for London and attract new investment. Chair, today marks the start of celebrations marking the centenary of women being allowed to join the Met Police Service. The Commissioner and I are keen to use this celebration to appeal to all women to consider having a career in the Met Police Service. In the words of our Commissioner, there is no better time to be a woman in the Met. I look forward to answering further questions today, but before I do, as you said, I've been asked for one oral update. The oral update request has come from Assembly Member Sian Berry. I welcome the ICO's finding in their review of the gang's metrics. The ICO found that whilst there was a valid purpose for the database, helping to keep Londoners safe by tackling gang violence, the inconsistent way it was being used did not comply with data protection rules. I've discussed this with the Commissioner. These are serious matters, so I welcome the fact that the Met Police Service has been working with the ICO and is in the process of implementing an action plan to ensure their processes and practices are correct. The ICO's enforcement notice requires the Met to ensure it complies with data protection laws in future and has given them 6 months to make these changes, which the Met has accepted and has started to implement. The Met has stopped sharing personal data on the gang's matrix with third parties where there is no individual sharing agreement in place. They've also committed to being more open about the database and are working with the ICO to complete a data protection impact assessment. I've previously and separately asked for a review of the gang's matrix, and MOPAC officers have been working with the Information Commissioner's Office as part of my review. The purpose of my review is to seek greater assurance about the impact of the gang's matrix and any disproportionality, the processes by which it is operated and governed, and transparency. The report should be completed by the end of this year. I am aware of a data leak related to the matrix. The Mets have told me that this is not a recent data leak. The leak occurred in May 2017. This matter has come to the fore, having been referenced in a recently published serious case review following the death of a young person in Newham. I am of course concerned by this leak, and it is important that appropriate data safeguarding processes are in place. I understand there is an ongoing investigation into Newham Council by the ICO in relation to this data loss incident. As such, it would be inappropriate to say any more on that data leak until the investigation is complete.
You have nothing more to say. Assembly Member Twycross.
Thank you. My question's on the EU negotiations. And I probably need to declare an interest in my question because I'm married to an EEA citizen. But how confident are you that the rights of EEA and EFTA citizens in London and those of EU citizens will be safeguarded following Brexit?
Well, Chair, can I say the Assembly Member's experience in relation to her personal family is not uncommon for many Londoners. EU citizens, many of them are our employees, our friends, our neighbours and members of our family. I've been concerned for some time that EU citizens are being used as bargaining chips when it comes to our exit from the European Union. And it's worth reminding ourselves that these EU citizens, EEA and EFTA citizens, as part of negotiations conducted by 28 governments, they've got freedom of movement and freedom to come to our country. So the idea that we would use denigrating language like queue jumping to describe members of our family, our friends and our neighbours worries me. It's even more astonishing that those words come from our Prime Minister. And you can understand why our neighbours, friends, family are anxious and nervous about their future.
Thank you. I think that the government has announced that following a transition period, obviously if we do get a deal, an independent monitoring authority will be set up to monitor the rights of EU citizens living in the UK. Understandably, at the moment, a lot of the focus has been on the deal and the immediate issues sort of next March and proceeding and following that. But with 1 million EU citizens in London alone, how confident are you that the independent monitoring authority is actually being planned for appropriately at the moment and will be given the teeth and resources it needs to protect people's rights?
Well, so far I would challenge anybody to explain the reasons for confidence in a Home Office device independent monitoring authority. We haven't got the details yet. I've asked my officials to work closely with the authorities in relation to this being set up. You'll appreciate, as a consequence of the hostile environment created by this Prime Minister when she was Home Secretary and carried on for the last 8 years, the Windrush generation and their descendants have had a difficult experience with UKBA and with the Home Office. And so you can appreciate why the EU are keen for there to be a separate independent monitoring authority going forward. We'll have to wait and see the details. but it's really important that it has the confidence of EU citizens, many of whom have chosen London as their home. They've had children here, they're married to British citizens, and it's really important that their rights are safeguarded and that the new body set up does what it says on the tin and is an independent monitoring authority.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Dismore.
On the same theme, Mr Mayor, with less than 5 months to go until the date UK is due to leave the EU, is it fair, according to Caroline Noakes MP, the Immigration Minister at the Home Affairs Select Committee last month, is it fair that the government are expecting London's businesses to check whether EU citizens have a right to work here in the event of a no-deal Brexit, without giving them details of how this will work, especially bearing in mind that Ms Noakes herself didn't know how it was going to work either?
Well, quite. I mean, anybody who saw the Immigration Minister's evidence will have been astonished by the lack of grip she had, not just this week, but last month, as you alluded to. What the government is doing is subcontracting to employers and landlords the job of being UK Borders Agency officers, and that's not the job of employers. The job of an employer is to be able to recruit, retain workers who will fulfil the potential of the business. And I'm worried, particularly for small businesses, who will be worried fairly or unfairly about consequences of taking on somebody who may fall foul of government rules. It's really important for the government to provide certainty as soon as possible and for there to be minimal red tape when it comes to employers' abilities to take on employees. And the chilling effect of this could be an employer being nervous to take on any worker who has an accent or isn't clearly somebody who's a British citizen. And nobody wants employers to be discriminating directly or indirectly against anybody.
And a few days ago, as you say, in her speech to the CBI, Theresa May yet again peddled her nasty rhetoric about EU citizens jumping the queue. Bearing in mind the 43% decrease in people migrating here looking for work over the last year, and in the 12 months after the Brexit vote, the 9% increase in people leaving and the 12% drop in migrants coming in, isn't the real risk not queue jumping, but not enough people in the queue in the first place, so as to fill key vacancies in the NHS and care sectors, as well as other sectors of the London economy, such as construction, retail and hospitality?
Absolutely. I mean, anybody who speaks to anybody involved in the NHS, in construction, in hospitality, in agriculture, in tech, will tell you the problem at the moment is the inability to fill the vacancies that currently exist. And we've seen in the last period a reduction in number of new EU citizens coming to London. We've seen an increase in those Londoners who are EU citizens, inverted commas, returning to country of origin. And so the idea that these people are queue jumping is not simply offensive and I would say denigrating to these EU citizens, but also doesn't reflect the true picture. But also, the idea that our Prime Minister would pit EU citizens against software engineers from Bombay or others in Australia is astonishing. And it's another example of this hostile environment created by the government. That's why it's really important, more loud than ever before, we send a message loud and clear that London is open. London is open to these talented people who want to contribute to our economy.
Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In your update, you omitted to mention your visit to Newbury Park.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and thank you very much for coming along to that tube station. You, along with the council and the local MP, have been campaigning with local residents for some time to get step-free access at Newbury Park. I didn't realise until I prepared for the trip 5.5 million journeys through that station each year. And so I met some of the residents benefiting from the lifts on either side, and that's one of the reasons why our mission was to invest record sums in step-free across London, the most invested in any time. We want to get to 40% towards the end of the business plan. You've experienced some of the people who benefit from having step-free access. If public transport is what it says in the tin, it must be transport for all the public, which is why step-free is so important.
Thank you. Well, I only asked, Mr Mayor, if I could have a little bit more notice when you're visiting my area, not on a political venture, of course, but I would like to put on record my thanks from my residents for investing in that and making it happen. It's a great benefit. Thank you.
Assembly Member Arnold.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Mayor, you quite rightly mentioned your concerns about public safety. And in what I'm saying, I have no wish to appear complacent in any way. But will you join me in congratulating the Hackney Gowns unit on their success on reducing knife offences by 46%. And they did this by targeting over a 9-month period 2 notorious gangs who had been identified with some of the most horrendous crimes, including murder. And I was just so heartened by what Detective Sergeant Webb said, and I do think on an occasion like this we do have to identify a leader amongst our police service when he said, our message to gangs is that you do not own the streets. And just to say, if we can do this in Hackney, then let's see more of this so that we can get back to our safe streets.
Well, Chair, can I through you thank the Assembly Member for what she said? It's really important we name and praise our brave officers, but they're community leaders. And you've given a good example of our police force being a police service, working with the community. And actually, our police rely upon the community to be the eyes and ears for them, but also you've actually articulated the best reason why a public health approach is the right way to finally solve the issue of the increase in violent crime. Of course, tougher enforcement, making sure that we stop people who are carrying knives, carry them freely on the streets, making sure that justice is done. At the same time, preventing somebody thinking it's okay to join a criminal gang or to carry a knife and thinking that's the way to go about their business. And the only way it will work is the police working with communities like the community in Hackney, youth leaders, parents, faith leaders, politicians, and others working together for the interests of the community. Thank you for raising that today.
Thank you.
Now move on to the question set out on the priority order paper, and the first question is from Assembly Member O'Connell and relates to tram safety.
Chair, can I thank the local Assembly Member, Assembly Member O'Connell, for his timely question. The second anniversary of the tragedy at Sandylands was just under 2 weeks ago, on the 9th of November, and I know all our thoughts remain with those who were affected by this tragic event. 7 people lost their lives and 62 were injured. Even though 2 years has now passed, the pain for the families, friends and the close-knit local community is still raw. We owe it to the victims, the families and to Londoners to ensure that lessons are learned and acted upon. TfL is making progress in implementing the recommendations to make the network safer, which were set out by the Rail Accident Investigations Branch. They're also working closely with the Office for Rail and Road, the ORR, and the wider UK tram industry to help make this happen. Many of the most important recommendations have already been met and completed. These include the installation of a device which detects and prevents driver fatigue, which has now been in operation since October 2017, speed reductions and enhanced signage around bends. TfL has also worked with its tram operator First Group to improve its complaints procedure to ensure that prompt action is always taken where a possible safety risk is identified. TfL is about to start work on strengthening the window glazing on London's trams, with the work on the whole fleet expected to be complete by March 2019. Contracts will be let for the automatic braking system and emergency lighting upgrade by the end of this year. Some of the recommendations are complex and have required a high level of innovative design, testing and procurement. For example, the automatic braking system will be the first within the UK tram industry. It will mean that a tram can be slowed or brought to a controlled stop if it's travelling in excess of the speed limit at key locations on the network. TfL plans to have this system implemented by December 2019. These new systems and technology that TfL is introducing are a first within the UK tram industry and world-leading in terms of safety for this type of tram network. A number of recommendations in the report are for the wider UK tram industry and are dependent on the Light Rail Safety Standards Board, which is in the process of being set up. I've ensured that TfL is providing its full support to the delivery of these industry-wide recommendations. TfL has provided an update to the ORR on the progress of the recommendations, which it's responsible for, and is waiting for feedback regarding the work done so far, as well as the work that is still underway. TfL officials are meeting the ORR this month to give further updates. And I also would like to end by saying, Chair, that I've asked the Commissioner of TfL to ensure that TfL takes an active leadership role in all of the recommendations so that all networks across the country can learn from the tragic lessons from Croydon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, indeed, this is a timely exchange around this tragic incident. Only 2 Fridays ago, it was the second anniversary. as you commented on, and it is still very painful to the community, particularly the very close-knit New Addington community. And I thank you for your full update. That gives us some reassurance. But 2 years after the event, and indeed 1 year after the report, which was published December of last year, half of the recommendations are yet to be delivered. Some I accept are outside the direct control of TfL, and I thank you for your update on the individual items that I wanted to talk about. But specifically strengthening the windows, the emergency lighting and the automatic speed controls. These were 3 particular recommendations that have not been implemented. I think you detailed them all in your response, but can I have your commitment that all the recommendations within your control will be delivered by March 19? Am I correct in understanding that?
I think, Chair, I mean, without rehearsing the answer,
No,
I think some of them won't happen until December 2019. It's the procurement is happening now, and so it depends on that. I think one of the answers I gave referred to December 2019, but I'm happy to, in a letter to you, set out each of the things when they will happen. And you're right to chivvy the TfL to make sure those that are in our gift, that are just for Croydon trams, happens as soon as possible. Those clearly for the wider UK tram industry, we will chivvy them to make sure those happen as soon as possible as well.
Because I think people of Croydon, New Addington and Sandylands would feel that it is unacceptable that it has taken so long after the recommendation report to implement the specific recommendations. Would you agree that the delay has been too long, Mr Mayor?
I would agree that any delay is too long, but some of this is not in the gift of TfL. It's the UK tram operators. Some of it is world-leading stuff in relation to automatic braking. How do you strengthen the window at the same time, allow them to be accessible when a tram is on its side? So this is new stuff that the industry is working on, but TfL has been pushing at all times in relation to the industry, and they've been learning lessons from around the country. I'm hopeful not only will it lead to an improvement in relation to safety in Croydon, which it must, but also lead to improvements across trams across the country as well.
And that is the point, because we do not want this awful incident to be replicated anywhere else in the country. So I look forward to you writing to me, Mr Mayor, with the details around that, and also what you'll be doing, in your words, to chivvy up organisations that are not directly under your remit.
Sure, that's very clear.
Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you.
Right, the next question is from Assembly Member Desai, and it relates to demands on police officers.
Chair, at the outset, I'd like to reiterate my own support for our fantastic police officers. They perform an incredible job in very difficult circumstances, and I know we're all both proud and grateful for the excellent work they do day in, day out to keep us safe. Police officers and staff at the Met are clearly under tremendous pressure, constantly being asked to do more at the same time as ongoing cuts. The government has forced the Met to make £1 billion worth of cuts since 2010. This means that our police officers are more stretched than ever, with the lowest number of officers per head of population in 20 years. All of this is contributing to the terrible level of morale within the force. We take this issue extremely seriously because it's vital our police officers feel supported. The Met Commissioner, the Deputy Mayor for Policing, and I recognise the stress caused by the increase in demand and decrease in resources, and we're doing everything we can to mitigate this. We regularly discuss how we can improve the situation with the Met Police Federation. We've enabled the Met to recruit 1,000 more police officers than would have been possible otherwise by increasing the council tax policing precept and allocating business rates to support policing. We've continued to invest in the Met from City Hall, setting up and funding the new Violent Crime Task Force. We're helping officers to manage demand through technology and training. This includes rolling out over 22,000 body-worn cameras, equipping 1,200 vehicles with mobile data systems, and issuing 30,000 tablets. We're also putting pressure on the government to implement the recommendations of the Police Remuneration Review Body to consolidate the full pay rise from 2017. The Commissioner has called the lack of a pay rise for officers a punch in the nose, and I agree. And the Met has also launched a health and wellbeing strategy enhancing the support available to police officers. Chair, there's no doubt that the last few years have been extremely difficult for our police officers. Even the Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, admitted last week for the first time that the police won't be able to tackle violent crime without more government funding. So I'll continue to fight for the resources and funding our brave police officers need to do their job.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 328,000 rest days police arrests have been cancelled so far for Met officers in 2018. The president of the Police Superintendent Association had this to say back in September, and I quote, "Policing is now utterly reliant on fewer people working longer and harder. Officers effectively giving their time for free by staying past their shift times or working on leave days. This exploits police officers and defrauds the public." Strong stuff indeed, defrauds the public. So why have so many rest days been cancelled? And what impact do you think this has on officers' well-being and indeed morale?
Can I just say, this question is so important because when we talk about officers from the Violent Crime Task Force doing increased stop and search, making arrests, taking weapons off our street, these aren't new officers who flooded in. These are fewer officers, overstretched, under-resourced, cancelling rest days. And that leads to a number of outstanding days that are going to be rescheduled and a backlog of cancelled rest days, which clearly affects morale and the fitness of our officers. Just to reassure you, the Met have set up a gold group to try and tackle this growing problem because it's not sensible for us to have a situation where fewer officers are doing work for more. But the best resolution to this is more officers.
Very quickly, will you join me and the rest of my colleagues here to condemn the disgraceful attack on police officers in Sutton rather, and indeed on all public servants?
Absolutely. It's really important that we condemn unequivocally these attacks on our brave police officers, and our thoughts are with the injured officer. I understand an arrest has been made. It's really important we assist the police rather than hindering them.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member Bailey.
Good morning.
Police officer being kicked into the path of a bus during a scuffle. I don't know if we're, excuse me, if we're talking about the same incident. What else can be done to restore respect for law enforcement in London, particularly amongst criminals? What else can we do to restore some respect for our law enforcement officers?
Of police officers?
Yes.
But I think we can't just rely upon the police instilling amongst ordinary Londoners respect in them. All of us have a role to play if you're a mum, dad, carer, politician, to make sure the public understand the role our police officers perform. Police officers, under the original Peel vision, are peace officers. They're there to keep the peace. 30,000 officers, 32,000 officers, 35,000 officers by themselves can't keep the peace. Citizens have a role to play in keeping the peace. That means providing information, providing intelligence, joining the police service, being witnesses when there's a crime, but also, as Deputy Commissioner, as is soon to be, Steve House said, if it's possible to do so in a safe way, helping the police in relation to individual circumstances, not for gratuitous self-pleasure, filming them or cheering on somebody when somebody's fleeing the police. There was an example, you'll be aware, not too long ago, where members of the public cheered when somebody escaped from a police officer in one of a fast food stores in London. That's not the best way to help our police officers, and that means respecting them in the role they do. Very, very tough role. The police won't always get it right. Some police officers will make mistakes. Some police officers break the rules. And so it's really important that they're dealt with, but let's not tarnish the entire police service with the actions of one or two.
Agree. Last year, 3,975 police officers were assaulted, and as we've seen, there's a new Assault on Emergency Workers Act that's receiving the royal assent. What will you be doing to encourage the increased use of these powers, this new sentencing? What will you be able to do to help that be used by the police?
It's really just reminding colleagues, it's not simply our police officers who are under attack as public servants. Anybody who goes to an A&E sees in A&E often our nurses and medics can be threatened. Our firefighters have also been targeted, and our police officers. The blue light services, first responders, should not be treated this way. It's unacceptable. It's really important that the powers that judges have in relation to increased sentences are used by judges. It's really important when it comes to the CPS charging anybody accused of attacking our emergency services. The appropriate charge is there. And it's also really important when somebody is caught and prosecuted and given an extended sentence, that's made aware to members of the public as a deterrent to anybody who thinks that they can get away with treating our public service heroes this way. We've got to support our police officers, our firefighters, those in the NHS, to make sure they're confident doing their job under sometimes very difficult circumstances.
Is there anything you could be saying to the police and the CPS, particularly around A&E nurses who, they are being attacked and definitely not in a position to defend themselves? Is there something we could do around police culture to make sure these new sentencing powers are people are aware of them and that the police are actually using them to send that deterrent message out? Anything in particular?
I think when somebody's caught behaving in this appalling way, the right things happen. The issue is detection, making sure we catch those who do these sorts of things. It's just not acceptable for anybody who goes to work knowing they're risking their personal safety because of, could be a terror attack, it could be a criminal, has the additional concern of being attacked by members of the public. Literally, we saw in 2017, and you witnessed this yourself firsthand, our firefighters, our ambulance crews and our police officers running towards terrorist incidents, running towards fires, right, knowing potential danger from the incident. But then on top of that, the idea that members of the public would attack them is obviously clearly upsetting for all of us who support our police officers, the NHS and the fire service. And I think you asked in your first question about respect. I think all of us have a role to play in instilling in young people that respect. That's why when Senator Arnold talked about the Hackney example, it's really important because young people see police officers, firefighters, the NHS on their side rather than the hostile experience some young people wrongly grow up thinking the police are, which is not on their side.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. The next scheduled question is from Assemblymember Curtin and relates to crime.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the Commissioner that tackling violent crime should be our #1 priority, and it is. That's why, despite massive cuts from central government, we've set up a new dedicated violent crime task force tackling violent crime in the worst affected areas. And it's why we're setting up a new violence reduction unit, which will bring the police and city halls together with local councils, charities, the NHS, community groups and others to continue our public health approach to tackling violent crime. But your question is based on two false premises. Firstly, there are no plans for the Met to start recording incidents of misogyny. And secondly, where there is hate, there is often violence. Tackling hate crime is not simply a nice to have, it's also crucial to ensuring safe communities. It's right that hate crime is a priority in the London Police and Crime Plan, and they were taking a zero-tolerance approach to hate. We've seen big spikes in hate crime in recent years with unacceptable levels of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, attacks on London's LGBT+ community, and other racist attacks. We know this is having a big impact on some communities in London who are feeling victimised because of who they are, what they believe, who they love. This is simply not good enough, and we must work to bring this to an end. London is a place where we celebrate, cherish and embrace diversity, and we must seek to stamp out hate crime and continue to send a clear message that will never let our city be divided by individuals who seek to harm us and destroy our way of life. Of course, we all know that demand on the Met has been increasing at the same time as resources have been going down following massive cuts from government. We now have 3,000 fewer police officers, over 3,000 fewer PCSOs and nearly 6,000 fewer staff. This means the Commissioner and I are having to make tough decisions on priorities. With these difficult decisions, we must ensure that those who are the most vulnerable and at risk within our society, such as those who are ill or frail, children and victims of high harm crimes, are prioritised. And this includes victims of hate crime, which can be devastating on the victims as well as the wider community.
Well, thank you for your answer, Mr. Mayor. And I do appreciate you saying that tackling violent crime is going to be your priority, and I think everyone would agree with that. But I think you misunderstood my question because I was talking about hate incidents, not hate crime. And of course, any violent crime which has whatever the motivation, murder, knife crime, stabbing, needs to be tackled, absolutely. But there's been a very widely reported freedom of information request asking the Metropolitan Police about hate incidents and how much time has been spent dealing with those things. And we have things which have been reported and investigated and filed away, such as a dog fouling someone's doorstep has been classed as a hate incident. We have a disputed line call in a tennis match, a man telling library staff he was campaigning for Brexit. And then widely reported earlier in the summer, in August, the former Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, made a witty joke about the burqa looking like a letterbox. And that was then investigated, or Commissioner Cressida Dick had to question to see whether that was a hate crime or not. Now, all of these things that I've just mentioned are trivial incidents. They're obviously not crimes. And I do appreciate you talking about serious incidents, but isn't it time that you and Commissioner Dick gave the message to to the public not to report trivial incidents like this, which are obviously not crimes, because they waste police time?
Can I just make this point? I mean, you've asked a long question. If you're somebody who, on a regular basis, is having feces pushed through your letterbox because of the colour of your skin, or on a regular basis has racists having their dogs fouling your front doorstep because of the colour of your skin, it has a deep impact on you. And that regular experience of being the victim of those events can be quite upsetting. It could be also because of your sexuality. It could be because you've got a disability. It could be for another reason. So I know you're not intentionally seeking to trivialise those sorts of incidents, but we've had examples. I know people have suffered these sorts of racist incidents with feces put through a letterbox and on their doorstep on a regular basis, intentionally because of the colour of their skin. I've also had examples, which may seem trivial, of graffiti spray outside places of worship and where people live, which can not simply be upsetting for the individual, but it sends a ripple of hate through that entire community. That's why some of these crimes are called message crimes, because it's sending a message to anybody who's of similar ethnicity, similar faith, similar sexuality, or has a disability, that they're also targeted by this. So, of course, the police will prioritise those crimes that are the most serious. And of course, there's a distinction between reporting a crime and the police investigating. But we do want to live in a city where people aren't treated this way.
Well, I do accept your answer on that one incident that I mentioned, but there are other things, such as telling library staff someone was campaigning for Brexit. That's obviously not any kind of crime at all. So something that is that trivial, would you tell members of the public, don't report that because it's wasting police time?
Well, all I say is the police will give those sorts of incidents the attention they deserve, which is not a lot of time, bearing in mind the priorities the police have in relation to violent crime. And so it's worth distinguishing an incident from a crime. And there's a definition for what a hate crime is, and the police are quite clear what a hate crime is versus an incident. And you're right, I think you're trying to distinguish the two. An incident, where somebody may report an incident which isn't a crime clearly, and a hate crime which should be investigated. And I think the police know the difference. And I think that's what both Sarah Thornton and Cressida Dick were trying to say when they recently spoke about this, that the police, when they've got finite resources and having to ration their time even more so than ever before, will always distinguish serious crime versus incidents.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
The next question concerns helping Londoners in the private rented sector, and it's from Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you, Chair. Both before and since I was elected Mayor, I've been campaigning and leading by example to improve life for London's private renters. Despite having no statutory powers in this area, I've created the UK's first public database of rogue landlord activity to help keep renters safe, and it's been checked more than 60,000 times already. We've successfully convinced the government to ban rip-off fees for renters, which will come into effect next year. We've ensured 100,000 Londoners have access to interest-free tenancy deposit loans, reducing the cost of moving home, and I'm supporting fuel-poor tenants in the private rented sector through the Fuel Poverty Support Fund and the Warmer Homes Programme, providing advice, installation and boiler replacements to help make their homes warmer, healthier and cheaper to run. And I'm setting out a radical agenda for future reform with my London model, while the government dodges the tough questions. But the truth is that the government have dragged their feet when it comes to renting. They've been slow in agreeing to consider any changes at all, half-hearted in taking them forward, and implacably opposed to the kind of radical change renters need. 2 weeks ago, at our first meeting since he took the job, I pressed the Secretary of State, James Brokenshire, to devolve landlord licensing powers to City Hall. After 2 years of campaigning for this power and pushing ministers to act, government is still refusing to commit to this simple change to help improve renters' lives. Crucially, despite announcing to create fanfare a consultation on 3-year tenancies for renters, ministers already appear to be wavering on their commitment to any real change in this area. I'll keep pushing ministers on longer tenancies, as I believe making them open-ended and scrapping no-fault evictions is essential to strengthening the rights of renters. And these features form the basis of my London model, a blueprint for tenancy reform that we're developing and that we'll be urging the government to support. As my housing strategy makes clear, although I have no power to control rents, once the London model is complete, we will consider what rent stabilisation or rent control measures might involve and how they could work for London. It makes sense to do this in the context of the completed London model, as no system of rent control can be implemented without first addressing the fundamental lack of security of tenure in the private rented sector. And my team and I will keep working and campaigning to improve renters' lives, but the key barrier is that this government has been incapable of the kind of radical change renters need.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I just say how pleased I am you're supporting the campaign to end Section 21 no-fault evictions, and that we do at last have a draft of your London model, which was published as a draft alongside your response to the government consultation on longer tenancies. It has lots of detail and it goes further than their plans, which is good. But it sadly only says, as you set out there just now, that you'll only consider what measures might limit unacceptable rent increases once the new London model is complete. And in response to a Mayor's question, it seems like that will not happen even in consultation until after Christmas. So I'm worried. I'm worried that this is further putting off action to really push the government on rents. I know that since very early on your line has been quite defeatist in giving up on getting more powers. But surveys show rent controls are overwhelmingly popular with the public, and even more so amongst older people compared with younger people, which is a really interesting finding. So I wanted to ask about just some facts about your activity in working for new powers. And first about your meetings with ministers. And just to be clear, I'm just asking for some information to be sent to me. Can I get a list of ministers, which have changed quite a lot, but a list of the ministers you've met, the meetings you've had, on which dates, and whether rent control powers were discussed at each of those meetings, just so that we can see how you've pressed them on this?
Chair, I'm happy to provide the cinema with details of meetings both James Murray's, the Deputy Mayor for Housing, City Hall officials and myself have had with government ministers and officials. But I think it's really important to address a key point in the cinema's question, which sort of gave away what this is about. It's not about bringing about change, it's about doing things that simply for the sake of them being popular amongst some Londoners. Important though populist policies are, we've got to make sure we can bring about change. What I've sought to do over the last 2 years is, of course, be critical of government policies when they deserve criticism, but try and work with the government to bring about changes in this area. The reality is, any politician being honest with Londoners will explain to them that it's not the gift of the Mayor or the Assembly to bring about rent control or rent stabilisation. We need to make sure we work with the government to get these powers devolved. So my answer deliberately, I'll talk about some of the other areas we're working with the government to make progress on. Some examples where we've made progress.
Thank you, Mr Mayor,
some areas we've made less
to give me that
progress.
information. I think you do hit the nail on the head a little bit there. I mean, what I'm proposing that you do is more or less what I'm doing with you, and I've continued to do since we were both elected. It's been 3 years since I brought this up with you first. In 2015, when we were both not even selected to stand for the jobs that we have, I pressed you when you were an MP to help amend the Cities and Devolution Bill, and I will just keep going on at you about this, and I want you to do the same with the government, because that's how we get change. If I can point out to you that...
Chair, it's always difficult when the question's longer than the answer. The point is this, Chair, look, it simply can't be right that whenever I do something that's popular, the Green Party claim credit for it, as them being the only person who have the...
I think you're not the only person who's experienced that one.
Can I point out, Mr.
It's a particular skills the Greens have, Chair.
Mr Mayor, can I just, on my time that I have, can I just point out to you that in October 2016 we first discussed this in this chamber, and at the same time as saying that you weren't going to get rent control powers, you also said the government is not going to ban tenancy fees, and yet we kept up the pressure on that, and yet they did that. And I think the thing I'm asking you to do is to keep up the pressure.
The Green Party claiming credit not simply for the Mayor's policies, but the government's policies as well, which is another example of don't believe everything you see on a green leaflet, let alone a tweet.
This is getting very political, and I'm out of time, I'm afraid. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And that was a very good note for you to end on. The next question, in the name of Assembly Member Prince, has been withdrawn. And so the next table question is from Assembly Member McCartney and relates to homelessness.
Thank you, Chair. The budget was a huge missed opportunity to tackle homelessness and rough sleeping in London. The Chancellor should have used the budget to announce a comprehensive plan to tackle rough sleeping. For London, this should have been based on my comprehensive rough sleeping plan of action, and crucially, the government should have agreed to honestly address the causes of rising homelessness and rough sleeping. My plan of action, developed closely with councils and charities in the sector, shows we need more than £500 million over the next 5 years to prevent rough sleeping and help people off the streets. In contrast, the government announced in August just £100 million for the entire country, and the majority of that money was being recycled. More broadly than rough sleeping, the Chancellor should have also put money toward tackling wider reforms of homelessness. London councils need far more money to meet their new duties under the Homelessness Reduction Act, and they're currently providing temporary accommodation for almost 55,000 households, including almost 90,000 children, a shocking state of affairs in one of the wealthiest cities in the world. The Chancellor should also have used the budget to address the causes of homelessness, such as welfare changes, including universal credit. And this budget should also have reversed cuts to services that provide support for people with mental health and substance misuse problems. It should have committed government to addressing what is now the largest single cause of homelessness in London, the ending of an assured short-hold tenancy, through a radical overhaul of the private rented sector. And it should have committed to a significant long-term increase in funding for new social housing. On all these counts, the budget failed. Since I became Mayor, we've secured an additional £12 million for London-wide services to help rough sleepers on top of the £8.5 million a year we've set aside for these services. This combination of services helped nearly 5,000 people last year. This extra funding has meant more and better services, and my outreach team has now doubled in size and now includes a dedicated team working in London's transport network. But work to tackle homelessness in all its forms will remain an uphill struggle without proper intervention from government, not just to help those already experiencing homelessness, but to change their policies that are actively fueling it.
Thank you. And Mr Mayor, you have previously called for a pause to the rollout of universal credit, and all the evidence, including a new shelter report out today, shows that the transition to universal credit means that those delayed payments mean that so many more people now are in rent arrears and struggling, and therefore being evicted and losing their homes. With a new Minister, Secretary of State now at the DWP, will you again write to her and ask her to reconsider the work that's being done around universal credit?
Chair, it is my intention to write, as I normally would, to a new member of the government, and Amber Rudd is the new Secretary of State for DWP, and of course I'll be making the point when I write to her about the impact in relation to universal credit we've seen with the pilots, the link with the increase in food banks, increase in rental rates, and I'll be writing to her, asking her to stop the rollout of universal credit, bearing in mind our experience in London.
Thank you. And Shelter is calling for homelessness advised to be available in job centres. Is that something you could perhaps suggest as well?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And of course, the weather this week has turned extremely cold. I know last year you made sure that homelessness, those cold weather shelters were open sooner and longer than ever before. But what more can you do this year to make sure with those rising numbers that there are more places for those vulnerable people to go?
Thank you for that question. So we are doing more this winter than ever before, but it's worth reminding ourselves that rough sleeping doesn't just occur in winter.
Yeah.
It happens all year round. You'll have seen the chain data for last month, which is very worrying in relation to them identifying more rough sleepers than before. So we'll be announcing the further measures we're taking this winter. As you remember last year, rather than consecutive nights temperature being required before shelters were opened, we opened them whenever we thought we were getting it there or thereabouts towards freezing temperature. We're doing more work this year, and I'll be announcing some of those plans in the course of the next few days.
Okay, thank you.
Assembly Member Whittle.
Mr Mayor, just on the point of rough sleeping and homelessness, we've just had Remembrance, and as you might know, this particularly affects our veterans. About 9,000 nationwide are homeless, and then a proportion of that obviously sleeping rough. Given that we've just had Remembrance, would you possibly put out a message from yourself about basically how we should look after our veterans in London? Because, I mean, it is appalling the way that they are treated by successive governments, I might add. Would you do that?
Firstly, can I agree with you? I think successive governments have let down our veterans. I visited recently an excellent home in East London where great work being done there, and we've got those providers into City Hall to meet with James Murray and myself to see how we can help more veterans who are heroes, really, who are, I'm afraid, too many are sleeping rough. And we're trying to ensure they don't get to the streets in the first place, and if they do, they're assisted out. And you'll see over the course of the next few weeks some of the fruits of the conversation we've had with experts helping our veterans who are, you're right, it's shocking that they should be sleeping rough in a civilised city like London.
And then also they end up having mental health problems as well.
Well, it's cause and effect sometimes. Sometimes it's due to mental health issues that they end up on the streets, but they can compound mental health issues, or you can have the start of mental health issues, or substance abuse as a consequence of sleeping rough. We've got good examples, though, of how you can turn them around with dignity. That's really important.
Okay, thank you.
The question on TfL advertising has been withdrawn, and the next question we go to, therefore, is from Assembly Member Twycross and is on the benefit cap.
Thank you, Chair. As anyone working in the public sector, in schools, in local authorities, in the police service, will tell you, whether austerity is over or not is quite clear in their minds. You'll quickly realise how misleading the Prime Minister's claim was. I was disappointed but not surprised that last month's budget did so little to ease the pressure on family budgets. The vulnerable have suffered the most as a result of the government's welfare reforms. In March, the Equality and Human Rights Commission released a cumulative impact assessment of welfare and tax reform since 2010. They forecast that 5.9 million children in Great Britain will be living in poverty by 2022, compared to 4.4 million if the reforms had not taken place. That's an additional 1.5 million children in poverty as a result of the reforms, and a 51% rise compared to current levels. Single parent and larger families will be the worst hit, and families with at least one disabled person will also suffer significant losses to their incomes. Despite this, next year's cash freeze in working age benefits is set to continue. In its budget response, the Resolution Foundation calculates that this will save the Exchequer £1.5 billion a year. That will cost a couple with children in the bottom half of the income distribution £200 a year on average. The Resolution Foundation also confirmed that 75% of the benefit cuts announced by the Chancellor's predecessor in 2015 remain government policy, including the lower household benefit cap, with half of those directly affecting family budgets still to be rolled out. We already know that the benefit freeze is hitting Londoners hard and contributing to the sharp projected increases in child poverty. More than 1 million households in the capital have been affected by this freeze, experiencing an average annual loss of £108 for each working age adult. And that's before you get to the 15,000 London households who've seen their incomes further cut as a result of the household benefit cap. If the Prime Minister and the Chancellor were serious about ending austerity or tackling child poverty, they would be cancelling these cuts, and those that are planned to the budgets of local authorities, schools, police forces or prisons. They chose not to.
Thank you. What's your assessment of the United Nations Poverty Envoy's report released last week? How can we help Londoners affected in the face of what the report describes as a political desire to undertake social re-engineering rather than economic necessity?
Well, my team, Chair, wrote to the UN Special Rapporteur ahead of his visit to provide a detailed picture of poverty and inequality in London, including the steps we're taking to reduce people's living costs. But when you look at the causes of poverty, benefits freeze, high cost of living, when you look at the opportunities the government had to alleviate these, then it's hard to escape the conclusion that the UN envoy reached, which is this is a deliberate political choice. But anybody who was on Twitter yesterday will have seen the extraordinary tweet from the UN rapporteur, Philip Alston, to a government minister who basically, the UN rapporteur was making the point that the minister may have had talking points about employment, but actually a lot of those who are in poverty are in work. It's in work poverty. 60% of those in poverty are in working families, and 2.8 million people are in poverty in families where all the adults work full time. So, you can't escape the conclusions reached by the UN. This is a political choice.
Absolutely. And the previous Chancellor pressed ahead with the freeze to benefits that you mentioned, knowing that it will impact the government's ability to meet the child poverty targets. And as you say, a lot of those children are living in working households. Do you expect to see a further rise in child poverty as a result of the continued freeze on benefits? And what can you do to help mitigate the impact?
Well, in the answer I gave in the original question, I made the point that the calculations are that there'll be an increase, I think 5.9 million children in Great Britain in 2022 compared to 4.4 million if the reforms hadn't taken place. We will do what we can in relation to addressing the issue of in-work poverty. Increasing the living wage was really important, which you know about. Joanna McCartney, my deputy mayor, has been working hard on the commission. That will make a difference. £10.55 an hour will make a difference. The good work standard will make a difference. We will be rolling that out over the next year. If more employers have the good work standard quality mark, that will mean less people working for a good work standard employer being in work poverty. But there's a huge amount that needs to be done in relation to the causes. Some of the welfare benefit changes the government's made, shouldn't be rolled out, the universal credits, but also those that are causing a adverse impact should be reversed.
And will you write to the next Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to end the freeze on children's benefits before April?
Well, I was going to write to you anyway to welcome her to the job, make the point about universal credits, but I'll also make the point in relation to child benefits that you've referred to as well.
That'd be helpful, thank you.
Next question is from Assembly Member Eshalomi and relates to the gender pay gap.
Thank you, Chair. That is a damning and unacceptable statistic. In 2018, as we celebrate the centenary of the first women winning the right to vote, I've continued to champion the huge contribution women have made and continue to make to London. The gender pay gap in London has only closed by 0.5% in the last 20 years. This is unacceptable. I'm committed to closing the gap across the GLA group and doing so set an example for London's employers. For the second year running, we've published the gender pay gap. Last year it was 6.4% and an accompanying action plan outlining what we're doing to tackle this gap. This year we've also published the ethnicity pay gap for the first time, 16%, and have encouraged other employers to follow suit. To address the underrepresentation of women in senior roles across the GLA group, I launched Our Time, a sponsoring programme which includes a practical toolkit for how other London employers can support women into leadership roles. Already, we've seen 6 employers from both the public and private sector sign up to implementing this initiative. We're also working with employers across London to improve gender equality. Our Good Work Standard will encourage London's employers to create more high-quality, flexible work opportunities so that women can progress in their chosen careers. I also want to support parents. The maternal employment rate in London, 60.7%, is lower than any other region, and 40% of unemployed mothers say finding flexible, affordable, high-quality childcare is a barrier to work. In the GLA group, we're supporting parents with family-friendly policies such as the childcare deposit loan scheme and our new premature birth and neonatal leave, which gives parents back the time and pay that they lost in hospital with their sick baby. More widely, we're actually looking at ways to support working parents across London with their childcare needs, including through their new early years hubs. But you're right, gender equality is about more than closing the pay gap, and our work on this reflects the range of issues we need to tackle, from supporting diversity in the architecture profession to addressing gender stereotypes in education and play, to getting the advertising sector to be more representative of the diversity of women in their adverts, to ensuring that we do everything possible to reduce violence against women and girls. Just to reassure you, I'm committed to fighting for gender equality in London.
No, great. Thank you very much for that. And just to congratulate you on the fact that out of your 10 deputy mayors, 7 are now women, and including the first time we've got a black female mayor. So very much looking forward to working with Debbie Weeks-Bernard. Just on that, you touched on the fact that TfL and the different groups across the City Hall have published their gender and ethnicity pay gap. TfL's data shows that BME women are still way down the pipeline and not applying. That gap is growing by 9.8%. What more can you do as the chair of TfL to actually ensure that there are more women and more BME women applying for some of those roles and actually making sure that they're in high positions across the TfL group? Well,
you'll know about this because you're living it in relation to intersectionality, in relation to different protected strands being affected by certain Londoners. Being a woman, being black means, obviously the pay gap, sorry, it's not obvious at all, but the pay gap, unfortunately, is worse than the gender pay gap, as you've alluded to. What we've done in TfL is we've, over the last year, appointed TfL's first ever Director of Diversity and Inclusion, Stainton Brown, and I'd recommend you and other colleagues meet with him so he can talk to you about some of the things that TfL are doing. He's made sure there's a renewed focus on ensuring there's a strong female and BAME talent pipeline, really important. There's a maximising potential talent management framework This is essentially about managing the talent. Of course, recruitment is important. Once you've got them in, how do you manage talent to make sure they flourish in the workplace? Also, TfL is doing some really good work in relation to a leader-led programme, and also TfL are part of the Our Time initiative. But I encourage you to proffer your ideas to Stanton as well as meet with him, so you can explain some of the things TfL are doing. TfL, I want to be a world leader when it comes to making sure we can have everyone's potential fulfilled.
That's great. And you touched on some of the barriers facing women, especially women who've had children, in terms of going back to the workplace. And obviously we know that childcare costs in London are expensive. I know obviously there isn't legislation covering this and your hands may be tied, but what more could you do to encourage businesses to look at making sure they advertise all roles as flexible, where there's a strong business case not to do so?
I think it goes back to an issue that was raised at previous MQTs by Fiona Twycross in relation to apprentices. Why shouldn't they all have the option of part-time rather than there being the presumption the other way around? And you're right about flexible working. It's a similar thing. Most workers can be trusted to either work from home or have flexible working. They're conscientious, and there's evidence that it helps productivity, helps staff morale, helps with recruitment, helps with progression. The good work standard we're working on will have in that what you've alluded to in relation to helping employers support women to progress in their careers, which includes flexible working, but also affordable childcare facilities as well. And so we hope to launch that formally early next year, but we're working with employers now to make sure we get that in there.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. And the next question is from Assembly Member Hall and relates to stop and search.
Could I also, Chair, join with you in congratulating the Assembly Member on being elected the Deputy Leader of the Conservative Group.
Thank you.
When stop and search is based on real intelligence, properly focused and performed professionally, it's a vital tool to keep our communities safe. I've been clear that when knife crime and violence is increasing, we should expect targeted, intelligence-led stop and search to increase, and I support overstretched and under-resourced police officers using their powers effectively. The law on stop and search is clear. The Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, PACE, and the accompanying PACE Codes of Practice establish the power of the police to combat crimes while protecting the rights of the public. Under Section 1 of PACE, a police constable can stop and search any person or vehicle if they have reasonable grounds to suspect that someone is carrying illegal drugs, a weapon, stolen property, or something which can be used to commit a crime. There is also a power under Section 60 of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994, which allows a police officer to stop and search a person without suspicion. Section 60 stops and searches can take place in an area where there has been authorised by a senior police officer on the basis of their reasonable belief that violence has or is about to occur, and where it is expedient to provide it or search people for a weapon if one was involved in the incident. As well as the potential deterrent effect of stop and search, it's also a vital tool for taking weapons off the streets and arresting offenders. Stop and search has been going down across England and Wales, including in London, since 2011. This year in London, there has been over 19,000 arrests following someone being stopped and searched. Stop and search has been increasing in London recently, with around 1,000 more searches taking place in October compared to September, and 1,200 more compared to October last year. We also know that these searches have been effective, with around 1 in 3 resulting in a positive outcome, including arrests, penalty notices and community resolutions. However, stop and search must be monitored carefully. I know from personal experience that when done badly, stop and search can seriously undermine confidence and harm community-police relations. That's why I'm pleased that since I became mayor, the Met has had the biggest rollout of body-worn videos anywhere in the world. This new technology has been a game changer for police accountability. We must also remember that stop and search is only part of the solution, and we're doing many other things to tackle knife crime head-on. The Violent Crime Task Force, which has been funded by City Hall, has 272 officers dedicated to tackling violent crime in communities worst affected, and vitally we're doing more to tackle the root causes of violent crime. Many of the causes of violent crime are extremely complex, involving deep-seated issues from poverty and social alienation to mental ill health and a lack of opportunities, and that's why we've set up the new Violence Reduction Unit. This new unit will complement our £45 million Young Londoners Fund, which offers young people positive alternatives to crime and helps those caught up in criminal gangs to get out of trouble and into employment and training. I'm confident, Chair, that all our measures, tough policing, a public health approach and investment in opportunities for our young people can make a real and positive difference. But it's not going to happen overnight, and it will require the government finally stepping up to properly fund our police, local councils and other public services.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm thrilled that you agree with tough policing, because I think that is the way forward. Do you agree with the Home Secretary and National Police Chiefs Council that it should be made easier for the police to use stop and search?
I'm not sure what he means by that. Maybe you do. What does he mean by that?
As an example, I was at a stop and search meeting in Harrow last night. The police have to be so careful that they log everything. One of the things that the police have said, there's no room on the forms for them to fit it in. They can see a load of drugs, paraphernalia around people. They do a stop and search, but because they haven't got anything on their person, they can't put it down. So therefore, it's not a successful stop and search as such. It's a great shame that can't be changed, because they would have reason to stop somebody in that respect, but it can't be locked. So just as one example. I'm also interested in your thoughts, and these are Trevor Phillips's words. They are not mine, if I can make that clear. As you remember, he was the boss of the ECHR. Trevor Phillips said that white liberals need to stop hand-wringing and admit the truth that the wave of knife crime is black children killing black children. He called for officers to target high-risk inner-city areas and to be exempt from laws which prevent them discriminating on the basis of someone's race or ethnic origin. What are your comments around that?
Well, Chair, I've never been a white liberal, so I'm not really sure if I can talk to the experience Trevor Phillips has of being a white liberal. What I can tell you is that actually, I remember last week, I think, the Deputy Chief Constable of BTP Police in the morning talking about the rules around stop and search being changed. And on the same day, the Police Minister, Nick Hurd, distanced himself from any dilution of the rules around stop and search. So I'm not sure if it's anybody's intention, the Home Secretary or the Police Minister, to change the laws around stop and search. Where I think you've got a very good point is in relation to the paperwork, inverted commas, involved sometimes. The police find it really frustrating. By the way, the paperwork's there for a reason. You know, the accountability is really important. Question, can we make it easier for police officers in relation to the time they spend recording? And I think what you're alluding to is there's stop and search, and there's also stop and account. And I know the Commissioner's looking at how some police forces do stop and account in a far more streamlined manner, so an officer isn't reducing the time he or she's spending doing frontline policing because of inverted commas paperwork. And that's one of the things the police are looking into in relation to streamlining the time they can spend, because you and I both want maximum time for police officers to be spent on the front line rather than doing sometimes important, but sometimes it can be quite resource-intensive paperwork. And that's why the tablets will make a difference. The tablets we've given to officers, it's a lot quicker than going back to the police station and filling in your notebook and stuff. So we're hoping some of the things will help.
Okay. In your original answer to my question, you said that you were pleased that stop and search was being increased, etc. I won't repeat everything you said. But before you were elected, you did say that you'd do everything in your power to cut stop and search. Do you regret saying that now?
Oh, not at all. I mean, it's worth reminding you, the figures I referred to were stop and search is going down since 2011. And the Mayor of London from 2011 until 2016 wasn't me. The Home Secretary between 2011 and 2016 wasn't me. I think the two people you may be referring to are Theresa May and Boris Johnson. What I welcome is the reduction in industrial scale, indiscriminate stop and search. What I think is a good thing is targeted, intelligence-led stop and search. And the game changer in London is the biggest rollout of body-worn videos of any police service in the world. This body-worn video means that a police officer has the confidence when he or she is using this valuable tool to know it's been recorded, so the phenomenon of a vexatious complaint isn't there. But also the individual knows the interaction is being recorded. And since we've had the body-worn video, the number of complaints against the police has been low, whilst, as you've said, the amount of targeted stop and search has increased, which shows we're getting the best of both worlds. More intelligence-led stop and search, taking weapons off our street, making arrests, but also at the same time the public having confidence in our police officers.
Okay. I know all about the cameras, but I did ask you when the stop and searches were reducing, you still said, I'll do everything in my power to cut stop and search. So I'm sorry that you don't regret saying that. But the one thing is this, will you undertake to support our police if they increase stop and search? Will you continue to support the police because they do not have confidence that politicians won't change their mind? They need to know they've got us 100% behind them when they increase stop and search.
Well, I support our police, which is why I spent the last 2.5 years arguing for more resources. I support the police, which is why I'm not the one that goes to the police and say you're crying wolf when the police are warning.
I'm referring to stop and search, Mayor. Specifically stop and search. You will support them.
Well,
yes.
If there are fewer officers, they're doing fewer stop and searches. And the problem is this, you can't expect there to be more stop and searches when there are few police officers. What we want is our police officers who, as we've said, are overstretched and under-resourced to be able to use all the tools in their toolkit to keep us safe.
Maybe you should get on with recruiting them like you promised in February. Thank you.
Well, Chair, I'm not sure if that was a question or a comment. If it's a question, which I think it would be, because otherwise you'd have ruled it in order, the question is this: do I think that we should be recruiting police officers faster? And the answer, Chair, is we want more resources to be able to recruit even more police officers faster. As it is, what I've managed to do using council tax and business rates is to have 1,000 more officers than would otherwise be the case. What I'm hoping the government announce in the police settlement in the next few weeks is a reversal of the £1 billion worth of cuts, but additional resources so we can have even more police officers recruited even quickly.
Well, I'm glad you saw that opportunity, Mr. Mayor, to make that statement. And the next question is from Assembly Member Shah and relates to the modernisation of London's bus services.
Thank you, Chair. London's iconic buses are known around the world. They play a pivotal role in transporting Londoners to the shops, to school, to work, to the hospital and home from a night out. 2 billion bus journeys happen every year. But just because routes have historically served particular destinations doesn't mean that they should stay exactly the same. London is changing, and Londoners need buses to be in the places where people want to use them. In central London, demand for buses over the last few years has fallen by 12%, partly due to improved rail services, such as increased capacity in London Overground and more people walking and cycling. TfL's proposals in central London will reduce congestion caused by running buses which are only partially full and will give a simple, flexible network with the right number of buses in the right place at the right time. These changes have been helped by the introduction of the Hopper fare, which provides unlimited bus journeys for the price of one within an hour. Freeing up underused buses in central London will also allow TfL to invest more of its £700 million annual bus subsidy to accommodate growth in outer London. I've asked TfL to review the outer London bus network to make sure it supports growth and encourages usage. We want to be able to deliver year-on-year increases in bus kilometres in outer London, and will work with the boroughs and local stakeholders to identify the areas of highest demand for extra services. Changes to bus services must and will be delivered at a pace that matches changing travel trends, customer demand and population growth. Some improvements have already been proposed. For example, in Brent, there has been a consultation to extend the 440 bus route from Stonebridge Park to the Wembley Stadium area, a public consultation to extend route 483 from Eden Hospital to Windmill Lane, which serves Harrow and Wembley town centres, opened on the 15th of November. TfL will also be modernising the bus network in other ways. This includes greener, safer buses and better information and other customer improvements. As the bus network is reshaped, outer London will be a net beneficiary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with you that London is changing, and particularly outer London is changing even faster, and is already under tremendous pressure for growth which is needed, which is planned through initiatives like opportunity areas. Now we've got 38 opportunity areas, for example, across London. Many are in the outer London areas where we've got 575,000 additional jobs we are aspiring for. Similarly, plans for 303,000 homes are planned as well. And these are minimum targets by 2031. Now, what worries me is that whilst for inner London, there's strategic approach to look at network in terms of route and branch review, there isn't similar thinking for outer London, where I believe we need that. We need public transport, bus network fit for purpose for now and future to come. My concern is that the response I get from TfL, they're saying, given the size and the range of bus services offered across outer London areas, one single review of the outer London bus network would be overwhelming and take years to complete. Yes, that may be the case, but the point is we need a clear vision for outer London. If it can't be done in one hit, which I can understand there are practical reasons, it can be done in sectors. But if we are serious about having successful growth, which is absolutely necessary for London, outer London, we need to have route and branch sort of change in or look at strategy for outer London bus network, because we need connectivity.
Have you got a question?
Yeah. So can you please, Mr. Mayor, address this issue and get TfL to look at having a strategic review of outer London, as I have explained?
Okay, can I just say, Chair, first, thank you for what you said, but I'm very happy to organise for the Deputy Mayor, but also the Director of Service Transport to meet with you to explain why the premise of your question doesn't really work for outer London. Let me show you briefly why. Look, Croydon and Sutton is very different to Harrow and Brent. Havering and Redbridge is very different to other parts of London. And so to have one strategic outer London review wouldn't work, because the housing coming on stream is very different in Brent as it is to Croydon. The other forms of public transport are different, for example, where there's been an East London extension to West London. Sometimes it's town centre to town centre buses that are required. Sometimes it's a bus to a hospital. Sometimes it's a bus to a new employer. And different parts of outer London are growing at different paces. And so to have one strategic outer London review wouldn't address the changes you're talking about, the rapid changes you're talking about in parts of outer London. What we are doing is increasing bus capacity in outer London, and we are, for the reasons I've alluded to in my answer, reducing the amount of buses in London. But even then, we're talking about 5% of buses we're consulting on. 9,000 buses, 600 routes, 33 buses consulting in central London. In outer London, we're trying to increase the amount of buses going there, but different boroughs, different parts of outer London have different needs.
Mr. Mayor, I hear what you say, though I'm not convinced with the rationale. I look forward to your offer of meeting Deputy Mayor and other TfL representatives to look at this issue, which is so critical. Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Pigeon to ask a question on the Rotherhithe to Canary Wharf Bridge.
Well, Chair, can I begin by congratulating Caroline on topping the Lib Dem Assembly list for the 2020 elections. Well done. The Rotherhithe to Canary Wharf crossing is an important and unique part of my vision for healthy streets. It will be London's first ever cycling and walking bridge of its kind, and amongst one of the longest bridges that open for vessel crossings in the world. It's an ambitious project in this rapidly growing part of London that will not only help more Londoners walk and cycle, but will also provide vital connections to existing and planned cycle routes on both sides of the river. A new bridge at this location has been proposed for over a decade, but it's only now that it's getting the focus and expertise needed to make it a reality. The key next steps we're pushing forward are further public consultation and engagement to develop detailed proposals before applying for a Transport and Works Act order. The timescales involved in the Transport and Works Act order process are at the discretion of the Secretary of State for Transport, but TfL will expect a decision within 12 to 24 months following an application in 2019. This would include a potential public inquiry, completion of a report by the appointed planning inspector, and a decision by the Secretary of State for Transport. This will then give TfL the powers to acquire land, build and operate the crossing, and as I've said, we expect an application to be made to the DfT next year. Subject to the outcome of this process, we anticipate it to take 3 to 4 years to construct the bridge and to carry out testing of the operational procedures. TfL is rightly ensuring that it has undertaken a thorough options assessment and worked through the key issues with the relevant stakeholders such as the Port of London Authority. This will ensure a solution is developed that best meets the needs of future crossing users, river users and the local communities either side of the river. New crossings on the river take time to get right. To put our process in context, the Mersey Gateway Bridge that opened last October took more than 17 years from when detailed planning started to completion. Although the Mersey Gateway is a road bridge, it doesn't have to open for larger river vessels, whereas the proposed Rotherhithe Canary Wharf Bridge has to have this function. I will get this new crossing built as soon as possible. The current estimated opening date for the bridge is during 2024, which is an ambitious timescale. There's no doubt there's still a lot of work to do to achieve the opening date in 2024, but this is a high priority project for London and we have a strong TfL team in place.
Thank you very much for that answer. As you know, I'm a long-standing supporter of the pedestrian cycling crossing between Rotherhithe and Canary Wharf. In fact, it was my first question to you back in May 2016. It's great to hear this progress on this, but why was there no mention of the crossing in yesterday's TfL board papers, all 286 pages, not even a passing mention in the Commissioner's report or in any of the papers presented?
It may have been discussed at the Programmes and Investment Committee, Chair. I'm happy to go away. We don't go through a board meeting all the details. Can I go away and come back and write to you?
It seems if it's such a key project for you, one of your ambitious projects, it should be being mentioned at every meeting and what the progress is.
I mean, to be fair, Chair, I mean, there are lots of important projects for TfL. At a board meeting, you would not expect all the priorities to be mentioned, and you'll be aware, and I'm sure the Solicitor does, of some of the things we did discuss yesterday, which are equally important.
So you've said it's going to hopefully open in around 2024. Does that mean you expect construction work to start before May 2020?
I hope so. Well, I deliberately set out when we're going to apply for a TWAO application. The reason why building works may not start in 2020 is it depends when we get the response back from the Secretary of State. There is no deadline by which he, or if it's a she, responds. And so I think the only way construction could begin before May 2020 is if we got back the response as soon as possible. But even when we get a response, there's further work, as I set out, we've got to do, and I can set that out from developing a construction methodology, extensive site clearance, diverting utility services, building access jetties, building foundations, large concrete pours, lifting parts of the bridge decking and ramps, not disrupting stuff. So as soon as DFT were to give us the green light, forgive the pun, we could get going. There's no reason why we wouldn't, subject to the usual procurement needs.
And it would be great if at some point we could put out when the consultation is going to be, the next consultation as well on this. But what I'm concerned about is TfL, almost in trying to avoid another garden bridge, quite rightly, has almost gone to the other extreme, and they've effectively blocked an existing design from entering the tendering process. Yet at the same time, they have allowed a competitor who advised on the procurement to then bid for the work. I was wondering, would you ask your auditors to review this to ensure that TfL has acted properly? Because I have raised this several times and not felt TfL are really understanding this.
Chair, it's a good example of you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So on the one hand, we've had lots of discussion about corners being cut and mayors having a personal preference in relation to a design and it leading to decisions being made which are not sensible. On the other hand, we've got due prices being followed, procurement prices being followed, but the original designer of the original model not being happy with the outcome. I'm happy to ask my Deputy Mayor, Heidi Alexander, to look into the concerns you've raised. I'm not sure if an audit's necessary, but subject to what the Deputy Mayor concludes, of course I'd be happy to have TfL looked into. I'm reassured from the conversations I've had with the Commissioner and others that there's no rules broken, but I'll ask the Deputy Mayor for Transport to look into the very serious concern that the Assembly member has. What I wouldn't want to do is set off on the bad foot, because obviously...
See, I would like auditors to look at this because I think something doesn't quite smell right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Your attention, please. Your attention, please. You are required to leave the building immediately. Leave by the nearest exit. Do not run.
Meeting adjourned. I understand that this was a real fire alarm. A fire alarm was activated in the lower ground floor, and I think the thing went satisfactorily. Anyway, this is force majeure, and we will finish at 1 o'clock. All the questions which have been unanswered at that time will be put down for written answer, and then we will rapidly deal with the formal matters on the agenda. We are still with Assembly Member Pidgeon and the bridge.
Yeah, so really, I want to say to the Mayor that something clearly doesn't smell right to me with this procurement. I really would like you to get your auditors to review this, to make sure TfL has acted properly, to make sure we've got time, we learn from mistakes, and we get this bridge delivered.
Okay, I think that was it, really. You're going to agree with that, aren't you?
No, Chair. What I've said, what I'm willing to do is to ask the Deputy Mayor for Transport, High Alexander, to meet with Senator Pigeon to discuss very serious concerns.
Okay,
thank you very much.
Okay. Assembly Member Bacon.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Mr. Mayor, Assembly Member Pigeon is right in that this is a very high-profile project of which there was much noise quite a while ago, and there's been very little noise about it for quite some time. How much is this bridge going to cost?
I'm not sure we at this stage put a figure on it for commercial market reasons. I'm sure in the draft business plan soon to be published, we'll do parameters there. I think we set aside some money for the preliminary work in the previous business plan, but it's, I mean, the exact figure we won't give at this stage, but there'll be a ballpark figure. I suspect it's with the caveat that I've not looked at the figures, hundreds of millions rather than tens of millions for the total cost, but I'm sure I can, on some terms, I can provide that information to you.
I'll help you out a bit on it, Mr. Mayor, because the most recent figure that I've been able to unearth is the consultation report figure, which was published a year ago, which, understandably at this stage, this far out for a project, put a range of 120 to 187 million pounds based on 2016 prices. Based on your answers earlier on, you said that you thought construction probably wouldn't start until post-2020, so clearly that would need to be revised and probably revised upwards. Do you accept that?
Inflation's going one way, but also I think it could be revised for another reason, which is now we know more where the bridge is going to go, and I'll explain the width is, I think it's 3 times the size of Tower Bridge, so aside from the inflationary pressures, there could be pressures because of the model of bridge that would be needed as well, but I can't put a figure on it, but I think it's not unreasonable to suggest the figure is going to go higher rather than lower.
My understanding is that because of, and you've outlined the width of the river at that point, but of course also the shipping that passes back and forth.
That's it, yeah.
Means that the bridge will have to be a lifting bridge. It's just a question of how high the bridge part is above the water. It could be 10 metres like Tower Bridge. It could be as high as 20 metres to allow big shipping, of which there is more at that end of the river than there is here.
Correct.
How practical do you think that is as a model for a pedestrian and cycle bridge?
Well, the responses are very positive. And one of the reasons why I think you're answering the question in a better way than I did with Senator Pigeon in relation to why you can't just accept the first design given, because obviously things have moved on, and so whilst I may be tempted to accept the design from that was there originally, things moved on. We know where the bridge is going to go now. The response, and so the advice I received is there's no reason why it can't happen. In fact, TfL there's a team working on this. But you're right. It'll be the only one. Let me just underscore your point. The only one that TfL can find which is bigger than this in relation to opening is a massive railway bridge over the Suez Canal. That's the sort of scale we're talking about. So it's big. And there are other bridges, opening bridges, which are not for cars. But this is going to be quite a feat of engineering, and it'll be fantastic when it's open. I think the figure is Gareth, the main opening section would potentially be 180 metres long, putting it amongst the longest opening bridges in the world. So you're right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from an engineering perspective, I accept that it's feasible. From an engineering perspective, almost anything is feasible. But it would need to be open for quite a significant period of time, because large ships, particularly so when we get cruise ships and other big ships that are more beside HMS Belfast, wouldn't have sufficient time to stop after they pass through Tower Bridge if they're heading east. So the bridge would have to open at the same time as Tower Bridge opens, which could be an hour delay according to the consultation report that TfL produced a year ago. So again, it comes back to the practicality question. If it's a pedestrian and cycle bridge, you think that might limit its attractiveness to users?
No, I think all the advice I've received is there's still a very good case for this. You'll be aware of our ambition to get more people walking and cycling. I think other things that have been looked at is the issue of either alternatives in relation to crossing in that part of the city, making the ferry, for example, more attractive than it currently is. Is that an option? And all the advice I've received is actually the Rotherhithe Canary Wharf Bridge is the best option in relation to getting more people walking and cycling in that part of our city.
So you said it's likely to be hundreds of millions, and we've accepted that it will probably go north of the range that the ballpark range that TIF have put in there for timing reasons as much as anything else, plus potential engineering complexity. How is it proposed to fund it?
Well, that's one of the things we'll be looking into in relation to the next stage. So the next stage is the consultation. Then an application goes into the DfT, and the DfT will want to have answers in relation to funding, of course. And that's one of the reasons why I appreciate it's frustrating in relation to an apparent lack of urgency, but those are the things that they've got to be looked into. The other option, I mentioned the ferry, the other option would be, of course, a tunnel. Tunnels are even more expensive than a bridge would be and stuff. So TfL have looked at all options in relation to this, but I'm happy for, when we're at further stage in the draft business plan, to discuss with you the sort of figures we're talking about. But, you know, as I said to you, I don't think it's unreasonable, and I'm not an engineer, to just like you suggest the figures are going to go upwards rather than downwards.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to pursue a little bit more on the funding, Mr. Mayor, because river crossings are by their nature expensive. We know that Silvertown is going to be funded by being tolled, and as a result of that, Blackwall needs to be tolled as well, so that we make sure that people go through both of them rather than just one. But if you're going to rely on a model like that, you couldn't really toll a pedestrian and cycle bridge.
No.
So what options are TfL? Are they exploring any options in terms of how they're going to fund this?
Of course, the next phase there will be. The first phase was the consultation. Do people want this? Is this the best option? Very positive response there. The next phase that TfL are working on before it goes back for further consultation is the sort of questions you're asking. Without encouraging potential bidders to go to the bid we're going to budget for, but in a big envelope, give an idea, roughly speaking, how much it's going to cost, work out if that can be afforded, how it would be paid for. A number of different models that there are for payments. You've mentioned tolls. Another model which have been used for other projects is a form of, not the form that's had a bad rep, a form of PFI could be one way of funding it. But I'm not prescribing the method of funding. What I'm saying is there are a number of different options aside from the tolling option you referred to. But clearly, the idea that you will encourage more people to walk and cycle, making them pay for it, is not attractive.
So are you confident sitting here today, I accept everything you say about future consultation, more plans being worked out, are you confident sitting here today that this is going to be a bridge that can be affordable and delivered within your, if you get a second term, within your second term as mayor?
I think the 2024 is ambitious. I think during term 2, the construction will be well under its way. I'd be disappointed if construction wasn't well underway. As I learned from recent experience, construction beginning doesn't necessarily mean it's completed by due date, but the 2024, in the words of the official who wrote my briefing, was ambitious. When you've worked with civil servants, you realise the word ambitious is a sort of just. But so I think construction well under the way. Term 2, I think we would be able to go all hands to the pump for it to be completed by.
Yes, in civil service speak, ambitious means unlikely and courageous means foolhardy. Which do you think this is?
I think it will happen. I think we've got to get through the DfT. I think I experienced in the Silvertown project, it's not quite a pivotal point, but the DfT rightly goes through plans in detail before they give it the green light and stuff, and you'd expect them to go through this plan with sufficient rigour. That's why it's important for us to do the work in advance of submitting it for a TWO application. At that stage, you'll have a better idea, by the way, the definition of ambitious or courageous, what this is, because if, for example, TfL aren't optimistic about succeeding with DfT, that's at the stage where you'd want to pull it rather than spending time, effort, hassle. But so far, I've seen no evidence of any reasons why we should pull this. Consultation, very positive. We're now going to go to the next phase, go back to consultation with a bid going into, according to the advice I received, 2019. And I suspect, I've been told, the fact whether it's 12 months response or 24 months response is not how good the bid is, just depends on workload of DfT and other questions they might have.
Okay, you'll have picked up that it's the business plan. I'm going to be very interested on this, Mr. Mayor. I'll accept your offer to go through that when it's produced.
Of course, yeah.
And I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Senior Member Duval.
Mr. Mayor, I wasn't going to intervene, but I do want to go back to an earlier point made by Assembly Member Caroline Pidgeon. Look, it's not about being in favour of one, or it shouldn't be about being in favour of one set of designs or the other, and I think you may have misunderstood. It's about the processes. And we've been here before, and when an Assembly member raises a question about the process, we need to clear the air. What's happened in terms of questions, my understanding, that have been asked of TfL, they've not managed to clear the air. And it's about the process. These processes were changed because the process followed on the garden bridges, which were wrong before. I'm deja vu listening to some of the comments that Assembly Member Bacon was raising. The issue is that you can have a meeting with your Deputy Mayor for Transport. We need a very clear and comprehensive report that nothing untoward has happened in the processes. And the reason why I say that is TfL have got form. And I'm not suggesting you're involved in that. We have officials giving you advice. We had the same officials giving advice to your previous mayor and tell us the processes were right, and the processes weren't right. And they've been found out not to be right. And there is a trust and confidence in TfL over its procurement practices that need to be cleared. And if they can't answer in a clear manner in terms of outside this forum, there has to be some questions. And you've rightly offered a meeting with Heidi Alexander, but I think the only thing that's going to clear this, and I do not want you as a Labour mayor to be tainted with processes followed by officials that quite frankly either have learnt the lessons or not learnt the lessons. And you need to have some decisive action of clearing the air and making sure that we are clear that we're following the rules. And at the moment, I don't think that is clear from the information I've seen. You may have seen something different to us, but I think that's what this Assembly should be looking for.
Well, Chair, as I said, I'm very happy for the Deputy Mayor to meet with the Assembly Member Pidgeon and anybody else who wants to meet with her. What I've been advised is in relation to the procurement for the design team, TfL has appointed a number of specialist suppliers to support it in developing the scheme through the Transport and Works Act Order TWAO process. Following a competitive process, TfL appointed Atkins earlier this year to provide engineering and architectural services to TfL on the project. Other suppliers included Mott MacDonald Environment, Marico on marine on navigation, and Quad on town planning. The procurement processes were generally structured to test bidders' knowledge and experience of developing similar schemes, not to select a specific design.
Mr. Mayor, I would normally interrupt you, and I think that's some great information there. But this is almost like deja vu. We had the same information, same acts quoted, same processes quoted, and then we found out something different had happened. I think it is best that you're asking Heidi to look into it. You've got your brief. You may want to share that information in writing with the member and to check. But I just think that some clear statement should be made following that meeting with Heidi Alexander that says this process is now clear, because we've had some of that information from your officials and it's still unclear.
Well, look, Chair, I've made the offer for the Deputy Mayor to meet with relevant Assembly members, but by the same token, I think we'll be very careful allowing a cloud to stay over TfL. I accept the point made by the Assembly member about some of the same people may or may not be involved in this process who are involved in the Garden Bridge fiasco. But I think it's a bit unfair to allow an impression to be left that somehow this procurement process is, in the words of some of the Pidgeon, smelly. And all I'd say to you is, look, I'm very happy for Heidi to meet with relevant Assembly members. If it is the case that the questions you have aren't addressed by the Deputy Mayor, I'm of course happy to relook at it again. Learning the lessons from history is really important. So I think the definition of insanity is not to learn lessons of errors made and repeat the same behaviour again and again. So, Lenny, in that spirit, can I suggest a meeting? If you're still unhappy, I'm sorry, I should be looking at you, Caroline. If you're still unhappy, come back to us and I'll then see what else we can do. Does that, Chair, address the concerns?
It seems an appropriate way to proceed. The next question is from Assembly Member Copley and relates to Crossrail 2.
Thank you, Chair. So it's a nice segue from Garden Bridge to Tom Copley.
I'm glad to see my brand is strong.
Crossrail 2 is vital for us to unlock the new homes London so desperately needs. New housing cannot come forward without the right transport connections, and 85% of all new housing in London since the year 2000 has been built within 1 kilometre of a station. Crossrail 2 would give a boost to new housing in places such as the Upper Lee Valley, where there's huge untapped housing potential that is held back by its current transport provision. By transforming an infrequent rail service and bringing in trains every few minutes, those areas of brownfield land would become prime development sites. Crossrail 2 would unlock at least 200,000 homes across London, over and above those that would otherwise have been built. Around 40,000 of these could be delivered before Crossrail 2 is even operating. Crossrail 2 is crucial for both transport and housing in London, which is why MHCLG, the GLA housing team and Homes England are all involved in its development alongside TfL and the DfT. Crossrail 2 is at a crucial point in its development. An independent affordability review has this year looked at ways of making it more affordable, and the Secretary of State and I are now considering the recommendations set out in its draft interim report. I'll shortly be considering with him the remaining questions over route and possible phasing. Prior to last month's budget chair, I asked the Chancellor that government make a decision about the project's future. It's already more than 2.5 years since the National Infrastructure Commission recommended that it be taken forward as, I quote, a priority. The budget confirmed that the Treasury will consider Crossrail 2 as part of next year's spending review. The project will need further funding to get to a hybrid bill. However, well before the Chancellor announces the results of the spending review at next autumn's budget, we need confirmation of the route so we can update the business case and crucially consult to safeguard the route. It's essential. It's an essential project for London and the wider South East. This is not just because of the vital transport capacity it will add to a city of over 10 million by the time it opens, but because of its transformative effect on homes, jobs and economic growth.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor. And the 200,000 homes you mentioned that Crossrail 2 would unlock represents 12.5% of the total number of homes we need to build in London by 2041, according to your new draft London plan, which is a huge number. And would you agree the government would struggle to meet its own targets for national housing delivery, let alone those for London, if it fails to properly fund this project?
No, absolutely. It's also worth reminding colleagues that this benefits other parts of the country as well. Improved transport links from Portsmouth to Cambridge. The housing won't just be in London, the housing will be outside London as well, so it's really important. But also, frankly speaking, you look at major stations like Euston, Waterloo, Victoria, they will grind to a halt without increased capacity.
Absolutely, and of course the wider country does benefit, which is why although London is committed to paying half of the total cost, we do need the government to fund it properly and come up with those financial contributions. But what new mechanisms are you looking at to ensure that councils and the GLA can best capture the uplift in land value? This is something that we've talked about before and something that TfL has done some work on. We'll need this land value capture to invest in affordable housing and local services. Are you confident the government will give you the powers that you need to implement these?
Well, one of the conversations that we're having with Treasury is how we pay for half the cost of construction in real time. So it's worth reminding colleagues from around the country, not only do we pay a big proportion of Crossrail 1 as a city, even though it's a national infrastructure project, we're offering to pay a lot for Crossrail 2. One of the lessons we've learned from Crossrail 1, which we didn't fully capture the increase in value of land in Crossrail 1, a number of reasons why, many years in advance. TfL estimate that Crossrail 2 would deliver an uplift in land values of up to £60 billion. And so we're looking at new innovative ways to try and capture the value of that. We piloted a Tram model in relation to land value capture. We're looking at other models to try and capture the value of the increase, particularly around stations.
That's an enormous uplift in land value. And just finally, in terms of sort of the sort of politics of this or whatever, we've obviously lost the Minister for London, Joe Johnson, who resigned over the Prime Minister's approach to Brexit and asking for a second, asking for people's vote. Have you met with the new minister yet, or do you intend to soon to discuss Crossrail 2?
The good news is, firstly, I should put on record my thanks to Joe Johnson, who was a very good Minister for London. The new Minister for London, Nick Hurd, is a Londoner as well, and is also a very personable and somebody who I think will work with us collegiately. I've written to him already, and one of the things I mentioned in my letter for priorities of our city are Crossrail 2 and working with us in relation to Crossrail 2. The advantage with Joe was he was in the DfT. And Nick Hurd isn't, he's in policing, but maybe he can assist us in there as well with his policing hat on. But I'm looking forward to a good relationship with Nick Hurd going forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Very much. And the next question is from
Bacon,
I beg your pardon. Assembly Member Bacon.
following on, I hadn't intended to come in on this question, but just following on from Assemblymember Copley's line of questioning about land value capture. Land value capture is fine in theory, but it is illiquid. One of the ways of capturing value from land it would be to charge higher taxation in the form of council tax or some kind of surplus in immediate locality, particularly around stations. Given that it is illiquid and people in property that is by the Crossrail 2 site will not be able to benefit by it until they sell their property, will you specifically rule out any kind of taxation attached to their property?
We've, you mean across London, sorry?
Along the route of Crossrail 2. So the land value capture that we're talking about is along the route primarily. It could be said that they would benefit because they could sell their property at a much higher rate because it's close to the transport hub. Okay. But that only works if you sell your property. If you don't, then you can't access the value.
So Chair, someone asked a very good question. So in the submissions we've made to the independent review in relation to the question the government asked was how do you pay the 50%? What isn't in there is making residents pay an increased tax. One of the things that's worth looking into is how the Northern Line extension was paid for in relation to business rates retention. So there are models out there, and the Treasury did a pilot work with us on how you pay for the Bakerloo Line extension in relation to businesses paying an increase. Another thing we explored with the Chancellor at a meeting with him was the issue of the value of the air above stations, obviously development going up. So to reassure you, and I will double check to make sure, but subject to that, in the modelling we've done, the 50% does not include residents paying increased taxes, as you alluded to, but I will double check, and subject to me not writing to you to say that I've got it wrong, that is the reassurance you can have.
Could you write to me and confirm that you are right then? If I don't hear from you, I'll assume.
Oh yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that. Well, first, can I say, Chair? But can I say, Chair? Look, we're not being facetious. We obviously can't publish the business case, but what I can do is give the reassurance to the Assembly member that the business case doesn't include what he's alluded to, which is a legitimate concern you can understand people having across a potential route going from south-west to north-east of London. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now Assembly Member Whittle's question on hate crime.
Okay. So have we jumped? Okay.
Have we jumped? Yes, we have.
Fine.
I should have said to you that the question from Assembly Member Boff has been withdrawn.
I beg your pardon. I'm sorry, Chair.
My fault.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's a misrepresentation of what Chief Constable Sarah Thornton actually said. She said that the priority must be tackling violent crime. I agree, and this is what we're doing in London. Sarah Thornton said that although desirable, she has reservations about the police having to investigate misogyny as a hate crime, which is currently being considered by the government. But this is all within the context of police funding. The main point that Chief Constable Sarah Thornton and the Met Commissioner repeatedly make is that police forces up and down the country are far too stretched because they're having to deal with massive cuts from the government. Both support the police cracking down on hate crime and that this should be a priority, and neither has said that the police should not be investigating hate crime. Where there is hate, there's often violence. So tackling hate crime is not simply a nice to have, it's also crucial to ensuring safer communities. It's right we're taking a zero tolerance approach towards this. I know some people are trying to give the impression that there are hundreds of Met officers sitting behind desks scouring the internet or elsewhere looking for insignificant crimes to investigate, but this is simply not the case, and it's unfair to give that impression of the police. The truth is that 81% of Met officers work on the front line, which is higher than the national average. Of course, we want to see as many police officers working in communities as possible, but we know that appalling activity is taking place online, and it's right that we, the police and society, take that seriously. And that's why I support the work of the online hate crime hub. Hate crime matters. Londoners who are victims of these appalling crimes will be let down if it was implied that there's somehow trivial offences are not worthy of police time.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I assume from that you're saying she was misrepresented then, Sarah Thornton.
Well, I think what she was saying was that incidents that aren't crimes should have time from the police spent on them when they've got violent crimes and other serious crimes to be investigating.
I mean, the thing is, Mr. Mayor, that nationally, something like 94,000 hate crime incidents reported, a mere 14% get referred by the police to the CPS. I'm sure that that is proportionately the same for London. That means 86% of the rest of them taking up a huge amount of police time. Now, I just noticed, I wonder whether you could comment on this, that over the weekend it was reported that the dedicated 900 officers dedicated to hate crime in London, references to that have all disappeared from Twitter. They've all been taken down. What I would ask you, it's a straight question really, those 900 dedicated to hate crime, which you've made a lot of, and indeed so have the Met, is there any chance, given the level of slaughter that's happening now, 122 people killed, that those 900, all, if possible, could be transferred over, or at least a proportion of them, half of them, to actually helping the police fighting what is an epidemic of violent crime?
Chair, I think the question demonstrates just a complete lack of understanding about the community support units, the community safety units. So there are 900 officers in the CSUs, and the CSUs do work like dealing with domestic abuse, domestic violence. They're involved in neighbourhood operations, which are very important in relation to burglary. They're involved in safer neighbourhood teams, and they also work in relation to hate crimes. So it's not true to say they aren't doing frontline policing. And so if an impression was given...
Online, Mr. Mayor, actually, I didn't just say online. I mean, basically, it's been quite clear, the point has been made quite clear that, in fact, 900 officers are dedicated to hate crime. That point has been made time and again. I mean, how does one misunderstand that?
Well, Chair, can I just clarify a misunderstanding an Assembly member in this great city has, which is there are not 900 officers working full-time on hate crime. There are 900 officers who are part of the CSU. They do a variety of things, from domestic violence and domestic abuse to working with safer neighbourhood teams, doing work with neighbourhood watches, addressing issues of burglary and hate crime. The idea that you've got 900 officers doing just hate crime is simply not true.
Right, but given that they do those other things in that case as well, although you wouldn't know that from what has been said, could they not, therefore, as a matter of urgency, be put directly onto the violent crime squad, as it were, what you announced recently? We need as many people as possible. We have fewer...
We're never going to know the answer to this one, Assembly Member Whittle. You're out of time.
You're just simply saying, no, that's not possible.
Well, he's not going to answer the question because you're out of time. So we now move on, and this question is taken out of order, which is Assembly Member Cooper's question on the plastic tax. That's 3164.
Thank you, Chair. The budget was an opportunity for the government to deliver on its commitment to improve the environment, but it failed to do so. It failed in a range of environmental areas and did not provide the new funding we desperately need. Like you, I was also disappointed by the Treasury's ambition on reducing waste, including plastics. We're taking action to cut waste and increase recycling in London, hoping to cut unnecessary plastic waste through the reintroduction of drinking water fountains across London, including a new £5 million partnership with Thames Water. This will help people refill bottles rather than buy new single-use ones. But London needs investment for our recycling services to meet our aim for London to achieve 65% of its waste being recycled by 2030 and a 50% reduction per head in food waste by 2030. To achieve this, we need government support. Boroughs need more funding, and in London we estimate that more than £100 million is required to meet our recycling target by 2025. A plastic tax could have helped support this. We know from the introduction of the plastic bag charge, which resulted in a reduction of around 9 billion bags a year in the UK, that small economic incentives can significantly change both consumer and retail behaviour.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm glad you share my disappointment with the budget. I wonder if you could tell me, or perhaps you could write to me afterwards, about what meetings you and your officials have been having with Michael Gove and his officials to try and make sure that this is pushed forward, because clearly you're saying we need help from the government, and it would be nice to know what City Hall has been doing to get them on side.
Absolutely. One of the areas where, for example, they could give us assistance was in relation to reforming the package and producer responsibility system, which needs to happen by 2022. But I'll write to the Assembly Member Chair, saying out all the work we're doing, lobbying the government, where there is promising responses from the government and where we think they need to move much further.
There's another tax that people have been talking about, which is an incineration tax. I wonder if you could indicate to us whether you might be in favour of that as well, again with some sort of element of hypothecation to try and fill the gap that's been left by the Treasury failing to assist London with the £100 million that you just referred to. We're not going to meet our 65% recycling target at this rate, are we?
Absolutely. And actually, can I just say, there are examples of taxes changing behaviour in this area with the landfill tax. You'll know that the landfill tax led to a big change in relation to the UK's ability to meet the targets to restrict biodegradable municipal waste that was sent to landfill. So look, I think the idea of a well-designed and implemented environmental tax like the incineration tax would be welcome. It's got to be hypothetical though. What we don't want to do is provide a windfall, forgive the pun, for other parts of government spending.
However, I was disturbed. As you know, we've started the scrutiny of your budget, and one of the things we looked at in the Budget and Performance Committee yesterday was the fact that you seem to be planning to remove any budget for next year in terms of air quality beyond the money that's going to be left in the transport budget. Now, clearly, Londoners do have concerns when they live near incinerators, and it seems a shame not to have any money in your budget to support them and questions they might be raising. Are we not going to support them, or are we just going to signpost them to the complexities of the Environment Agency? Surely we should be supporting and listening to Londoners who live near incinerators.
Well, you'll be aware from the work, huge amount of work we're doing on air quality, and I'm surprised that's not been celebrated more actually by members of the Assembly. Only last week I was in Lewisham to launch the 5 new low-emission bus zones, which will make a big difference in relation to improving the quality of air in other parts of London that you've seen benefited in Putney. Putney High Street has seen the hourly breaches reduced by almost 90%. Brixton has seen similar reductions by 90%, and we're seeing a rollout across 5 further areas. Good example of air quality has been improved as a direct consequence of us spending to retrofit buses and buy new electric hybrid or hydrogen buses as well. So we'll carry on doing those works. In relation to incinerators, we're not supporting any new incinerators in London other than those already given permission, and it's really important that anybody thinking about applying for permission for an incinerator in London realises the message from City Hall and what we set out in our draft London plan as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. The next question is from Assemblymember Gavron relating to... Really? Well, we're speeding things up then. In fact, the next question is from Assemblymember Boff, and it relates to housing, and it's question 3383.
So is it 18?
That's the one, yes.
Thank you, Chair. The housing crisis has been caused by decades of failure to build enough council, social rented and other genuinely affordable homes for Londoners. I've been clear that we need a step change in funding and powers from national government to truly end the housing crisis, but I've also been clear City Hall will use every tool and resource we have to make a difference now, and the facts show some of the progress we've already made. Earlier this year, we launched the first ever City Hall programme dedicated to council home building after securing the first money from national government for social rent in a decade. Over £1 billion will now support 28 local authorities to build over 14,000 council homes, including more than 11,000 at social rent levels. This is a 5-fold increase in council home building over the next 4 years compared to the last 4. More broadly, this funding means more than 12,500 social rented and other genuinely affordable homes were started in 2017-18. That's the highest number since responsibility for affordable housing was devolved, and crucially includes nearly 3,000 at social rent levels. Towards the end of my predecessor's term, just 13% of new homes given planning permission were affordable. Now in schemes I've considered, between pioneering new planning rules being adopted and summer this year, affordable housing has jumped to 38%. Savills recently reported 35% affordable housing threshold is becoming embedded in land values. We've also introduced our country's first funding rules requiring resident ballots over estate regeneration plans. We've now seen the first such ballot take place in Barnet, where residents of Westhorpe Gardens and Mills Grove Estate voted 75% in favour of the offer put to them by their landlord, Metropolitan Thames Valley. Our policies are also helping the millions of Londoners in the private rented sector. Every London council is now part of our rogue landlord and agent checker, which already contains around 1,200 records compared to 0 on the government's attempted national rogue landlord database. Our policies are also helping people who sleep rough. We've secured an extra £12 million from national government for new services to help people off the streets. We're using this funding to double the number of London Street Rescue outreach workers, boost local weather shelters with a £600,000 small grants programme, expand the No Second Night Out service, including funding 2 new staging posts, and to improve access to mental health services with a specialist team to assess rough sleepers. GLA services are now helping a record number of people, 200 more each month compared to the end of the previous mayor's term. Our approach is making a real difference to Londoners' lives, but I'm clear we need proper funding and powers from national government to truly fix the housing crisis.
Thank you. Haringey Council has recently applied to the GLA for an exemption to your requirement for a ballot for tenants, as you referred to in your response there, at a development on Broadwater Farm in respect of the demolition and replacement of Tangmere and Northolt blocks. They're a recipient of GLA Housing Fund, of course. Will you be granting such an exemption?
I've not seen the application yet. I've seen what's been in the media. But there are some exemptions in relation to if there are concerns around the fabric of the building, the bricks and mortar. If there's a danger, for example, that it's a danger. So I've not seen the application, but there are some criteria where ballots are required. And so depending on the merits, inverted commas, of the application, the officers will look at the scheme.
Can you think of any reason why the leadership of Haringey Council would want to avoid a ballot of its residents? Because it, after all, broke its own manifesto commitment to its residents that was put to those residents in May this year.
I can't speak in specifics of that application, but in general terms, I think councils should be consulting with their residents via a ballot when they come to regenerating their estate. And if they want funding from City Hall, and there's a loss of even one social home, the expectation is a like-for-like replacement, more social homes, but they've got to have a ballot. There are some exemptions, as I've said, where it can be accepted. I'm not sure council should be trying to use that as a loophole to avoid, as you're suggesting, consulting residents.
One would have thought that the residents themselves would not particularly vote in favour of staying in a building that was demonstrated to be unsafe. So I just wonder why you think that Haringey might not want to consult the residents with regard to that.
The purpose behind the exemption wasn't for that reason, it's because of the time it takes to have a ballot done, I think. So if it was the case, and Chair, I'm talking hypotheticals, I'm not done on the merits, if it was the case, for argument's sake, in a particular council, a council was concerned that a building wasn't safe now, then requiring a ballot in X months' time may not be the sensible thing to do. I don't know the merits of that particular case, but that's the reason why the need for the ballot was exempt, rather than people who were in fear of danger not voting to have a regeneration.
Certainly in terms of timing, I agree with you. One has to have a good amount of time in order to organise a ballot. That's a minimum requirement. Except the Haringey Council has planned to redevelop this site since June. Surely that's enough time to organise a ballot of residents.
I mean, Chair, I've not seen the application and stuff, but if it's been made to us, we'll be making sure we ask those sorts of questions that the Assembly member is asking.
So just to confirm, Mr Mayor, you do stand by your press release from the 18th of July this year, which said that the Mayor is determined to use his funding and planning powers to their fullest extent to protect social housing and give its residents a voice in the capital.
Absolutely.
Would granting an exemption to Haringey be in keeping with that commitment?
It depends on the merits of the application. The exemptions are there for a reason, and if a council satisfies the grounds of an exemption being satisfied, then of course that's legitimate. I mean, I just don't know enough about the application that's going to be made by Haringey Council. What I'm clear about is our intention, is to make sure that residents are consulted properly via a mandatory ballot whenever anybody has got plans to regenerate the estate, particularly with the loss of social homes. I'll give you one example in my answers where one council's with a HA has already done that, which is in Barnet.
Would you say that if you did end up giving Haringey this exemption, it would be an example of you not having confidence that the residents know what's good for them?
I can't talk about specifics. In general terms, if an exemption is granted, it's because a council has satisfied the officers that they are eligible for an exemption.
Mr Mayor, don't you think that Haringey's refusal to hold a banner, I mean, you know, does their refusal to hold a ballot benefit the many or the few? You know what? It doesn't seem to be consistent with what the undertakings, not only that you've made in the past, and I welcome those undertakings, but what they made themselves to their own electorate.
Well, Chair, we're talking about a hypothetical application made by Haringey. They're concerned, according to this, what this member is saying about the safety of that building. And if it is the case they're concerned about the safety of the building, you know, you want them to take action sooner rather than later. Haringey is a good example of a council that's actually bid to build 848 council homes. An example of a council building council homes for the many, not the few. The few is what the previous mayor did with luxury developments sitting empty on penthouses. The few is examples of 80% market value being affordable, when we know the many want council homes, want social homes, and I commend Haringey for applying successfully to start building 848 council homes, not the con for the few, but the real housing for the many, and I commend them for that work they're doing.
So, Mr. Mayor, if I look through the list of applications that you've granted, I'm assuming I'll find absolutely no luxury developments in there.
For council housing, no, there are no luxury developments
in
council
anything
housing.
that you've approved. There's no luxury developments, is that correct?
For council housing?
Luxury developments that you've approved within your remit.
Chair, we're talking about homes for the many, not the few. I think penthouses that are luxury are for the few. Yeah. Council homes, homes where you pay social rent, homes where you pay London living rent, homes that are shared ownership are for the many. And that's why I ditched the dodgy definition that the previous mayor had for the few of 80% market value. And that's why we've negotiated £1 billion towards building council homes over the next 4 years. 11,000 council homes started in London, 5 times more in the next 4 years than the last 4 years. An example of a mayor being the mayor for the many and not an assembly member for the few.
So will you, I'm impressed, emboldened by your words, Mr. Mayor. So will you therefore give the undertaking that you won't approve any luxury developments?
No, Chair,
I mean, you're saying these words, Mr. Mayor. I'm just holding you to account for what you've just said. Will you not be approving any luxury developments in the
Chair, it's worth explaining to the Assembly member some of the fruits of the changing policies that I've had in relation to housing strategy.
It's a very simple question.
He's asked you a simple question.
Yeah, well,
yes, no.
To answer the simple question requires an explanation of the policies that lead to permissions being granted. And the two biggest tools a mayor has is the housing strategy and the London plan. And so the housing strategy and the London plan are both quite clear in relation to my expectation for accelerated permission, 35% to be genuinely affordable. The other 65% is up to the developer, 35% fast track, 50% genuinely affordable. And by the way, it's genuinely affordable for the many, not the con there was previously for the few. Now, of course, a developer will want to cross-subsidise the affordable housing in various means. Some of it could be market value, some of it could be luxury. The key thing is having a mayor who's governing for the many rather than one who does it for the few.
So that answer, is it yes, I will be approving?
I think it was.
Was it yes, I will be approving schemes that contain luxury developments, or no, I won't be approving schemes that include luxury developments?
Well, I think, let me try again, Chair. We will be granting permission for mixed developments. These mixed developments will include a range of homes. The key thing is there will be far more homes for ordinary Londoners than there were before I became mayor. Of course, there will be homes for all sorts of income scales. It's really important we cater for those wealthy Londoners and others who live in our great city, but it's as important, if not more important, for this administration to make sure we cater for those Londoners who are struggling to make ends meet. And that's why I'm really pleased Haringey Council are one of 28 councils who've reached an agreement with me to start over the course of the next 4 years, 11,000 council homes, 5 times more in the next 4 years than the last 4 years. And I would hope any Assembly member worth his salt or her salt would welcome that and would commend that.
That's great. I mean, I think, I'm sure momentum in Haringey will relish the idea that they now have a mayor who will build luxury developments. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Chair, so was that a question or a...
It was a statement.
I'm sure if it wasn't a question, you'd ruled out of order as an impartial chair.
He can rule it out of order.
No,
I've done it
he's
now.
made a statement. You have had loads of opportunities today which you have seized where you have interpreted a statement as a question. This time, it was a statement.
It was a statement.
And that was the end
I
of it.
shouldn't have done it, Mr.
I
Mayor.
must now ask the Assembly, please, to suspend standing orders so that we can allow the business on the agenda to be completed up until 1 p.m. only. Right. So the next question is from Assembly Member Russell. It relates to nighttime economy workers.
Sorry, what number is that?
That's 3041. Question from Devon.
Thank you. Night workers are vital to our city. They are the emergency service workers who keep us safe, drive our tubes and buses, entertain us in our theatres and music venues, clean our streets and workplaces and keep our NHS running. In response to the recommendations in the report, City Hall and the London Nighttime Commission have undertaken groundbreaking research to better understand London at night. London at night, an evidence base for a 24-hour city, is a first for a global city, giving us the most comprehensive picture ever produced of London between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. We now know that 1.6 million Londoners, 1/3 of the capital's workers, usually work evenings and nights, and that jobs in the nighttime industries are growing faster than the wider economy at 2.2% a year. That's why it's important we support night workers through the Night Tube and Night Overground, which has allowed millions of people to get home safely, quickly and affordably at night. I'd remind the Assembly that the previous mayor gave up on the idea of London having a night tube. Demand for the night tube has increased, with 8.7 million customers using the service last year. It's also generated an additional £190 million for London's economy. In addition to this, we continue to provide a comprehensive night bus service with 130 routes across London and 918 buses serving them. 50% of people who use night buses are going to or returning from work, so early morning and late night shift workers can benefit from the night tube and night buses. Our research also revealed that over 500,000 night workers are paid below the London living wage. Every Londoner is entitled to a decent standard of living, no matter what time of day or night they work. And that's why I've called upon nighttime employers to step up and ensure the welfare of their employees by paying them the London living wage. Every Londoner is entitled to a decent standard of living. Time is short, so I allow these members some questions before, otherwise I don't use up your time.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and also to your Night Czar, Amy Lamé, for picking up the Economy Committee's recommendation in our Rewrite the Night report last year when I was chair, to research the proportion of workers in the London nighttime economy who receive the London living wage. As you said, your report highlights some really shocking statistics. The fact that 1.6 million people in London are working at night and over 530,000 of them are paid less than the London living wage. That's almost a third of nighttime workers getting less than the London living wage. And it's almost double the number of people who are paid less than the London living wage during the daytime. It's just completely unacceptable. Now, the London living wage got going because big companies got behind the campaign. Are you going to work with companies who employ people at night to get their commitment to pay the London living wage?
Absolutely. First, thank you for what you said and the way you've said it. Yes, we are. Can I just give you some other piece of potential good news in this area is the Good Work Standard will encourage more employers to pay the living wage, because to be a Good Work Standard accredited employer, you'll be paying the London living wage. But also the evidence shows it's good for your business, improves staff morale, helps with recruitment and also retention.
Excellent, thank you. Your study showed that 4 out of 5 visitors to London say that culture and heritage is the main reason for their trip. And more than half of the people working in cultural and leisure industries at night are paid less than the London living wage. These workers make London an interesting and attractive place to visit, but they're not being paid properly. It's not okay to make people work for less because of the love of what they're doing in the arts. So will we see a more robust policy in your final culture strategy on making the London living wage the standard in the cultural and creative sector?
Well, Chair, there's at least 12 points in that question that deserve a response. Let me deal with each of them with the time I've been given.
The question is about people in the arts. Will you update your culture strategy in the final version to be more robust about the cultural sector committing to the London living wage?
In which way do you mean?
There was a hint in the culture strategy that that some in the arts people are not being paid properly. Your research has just borne that out. Right. And so I'm just wondering if this research that you've just done is going to mean that you update your culture strategy with a more robust recommendation on culture, the cultural industries paying the London living wage.
I've already said I want everyone receiving a London living wage who works in London. If you do a hard day's work or a hard night's work, you get a decent pay for doing that. And that means that the Good Work Standard that I'll be launching early next year will encourage employees who employ in the nighttime or daytime to be a living wage employer. So, of course.
Okay, and finally, on the Good Work Standard, which I thought was being published at the end of this year, but it'll be good to see it at the beginning of next year, will you have a target for the number of London businesses that you want to sign up to the Good Work Standard in the first year?
So I should explain. So the inverted commas soft launch is this year. So that's when we get some employers on side. The idea is to have a bigger launch next year. Once we've got some employers on side doing the Good Work Standard to encourage others that actually it's good for business to join the Good Work Standard. So,
okay.
So that's the confusion here. So
okay, that sounds great. But will you have a target for the number when it's been in place for a year?
Once we launch it properly next year, we will. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. We'll have a target in relation to how many we expect to have, metrics, how we go going forward. We did a similar thing with the living wage. I mean, since I've become mayor, the numbers of living wage employers has gone up hugely at the same time as the living wage has gone up. So it shows there's a good business case for paying a decent pay for a decent day's work.
That's great. So there will be a target in the Good Work Standard when it comes out.
I don't see why we shouldn't. I think it's important to have aspiration, but have metrics against which you measure success.
That's great. I'm out of time.
All right. Thank you very much. And now we will have Assembly Member Gavron's question, which is 3303 on planning permissions and build-out rates.
Thank you, Chair. When I met the Chancellor ahead of the November budget in 2017, I drew his attention to the fact that there were 270,000 homes with planning permission in London that were not yet built. I was clear that more of the same would not accelerate home building. London needs a different approach if we want to speed up build-out rates. I therefore welcomed the Chancellor's decision to ask Oliver Letwin to conduct a review of build-out, and I was pleased that my team to work closely with him, and I indeed met him as well. The review's core conclusion that we are currently far too reliant on large developers building expensive homes for sale is one we support for the few, not the many. When 80% of new market sale homes in London are affordable to just 8% of London renters, trying to build more of the same simply won't work. To increase build-out rates, we need to be building more council housing, social housing, and other genuinely affordable homes, the sort of housing for which there is massive demand. I made this very clear to Oliver Letwin when we met, and I welcome his including it in his recommendations. How far these recommendations are translated into action depends on what the government does next. We're already showing what a difference we can make by using the powers and resources we have to make more of the homes in London genuinely affordable. Our pioneering planning policies have boosted affordable housing in planning consents, embedding a minimum of 35% in land values according to Savills. Likewise, our affordable homes programme has helped to start a record number of new social rented and other genuinely affordable homes. And meanwhile, our interventions in the land market, using the £250 million revolving London Land Fund, show what a more interventionist role for the public sector looks like, as recommended by Sir Oliver's report. Through the Land Fund, my team is helping to unlock otherwise stalled opportunities and raising the level of affordable housing on sites to 50% or more. But to really meet the scale of the challenge, we need a step change in powers and funding from the government. And so, supported by the conclusions of Oliver Letwin's report, we will continue to urge ministers to act.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I've been very struck, apropos of the Letwin review, that in fact, in terms of the permissions granted in London, boroughs are actually exceeding the very high targets that you currently now have in the new London plan. But the homes are they're just not being built out, let alone started. And this year, you mentioned a figure there, but this year, the total number of homes not built out will probably rise to about 300,000. Now, as you say, Letwin is good on this, actually, and he points out that, in fact, one of the problems is that there's too many of the same type of housing, e.g. like one-bed market flats, and that you need more diversification, and that you need a range of homes for people from all sorts of income backgrounds, including social rented. Now, the legacy, and I think it's rather a terrible legacy, left by the last mayor, I'm taking 2014 figures, is that of the hundreds of thousands of not built out homes, only 3,000 are going to be for social rent. Now, my question is, will this be tying your hands when when you want to, and know you want to, build, and Letwin recommends it, build affordable housing alongside a range of market housing?
Yeah, so one of the conclusions that Letwin drew was that the rate at which new market sales homes were being built, question, can they be absorbed into the local housing market? And that's why we need a diversity of housing, and genuinely affordable homes is the answer. So when we've got a situation where we know it's not possible to absorb the sale of properties of a certain value, we know what's happening to macroeconomics, concerns around Brexit, actually provides an opportunity to build more social rented housing, more council housing, more genuinely affordable housing. So I actually think it's an opportunity for the government. If the government means what they say about increasing the number of homes being built, then actually the solution is not going to be in market value properties. And that's why it's really important we get some proper investment for council housing and other forms of homes. The good news is the deal we've made with councils this year, £1 billion, 14,000 council homes, 11,000 council homes, 14,000 if you include social rent, other types of homes, is a start. But we need to see more homes started that have been given permission. And the good news in relation to permissions granted that are 35% to 50% affordable is we hope to see an increase in the amount of homes completed. But Letwin concludes you need more diversity in the housing supply. We can provide that in relation to more affordable homes if the government gives us the resources with the powers.
On the powers, I noticed you and Deputy Mayor James Murray had various meetings with Letwin. I wonder if you asked for this, because I think really Letwin, to a certain extent, is only tinkering around the edges of the system, because what is absolutely crucial, and it's a missing element in the Letwin review, is that we need to reform the Land Compensation Act. And it ties your hands, because you can't actively, and boroughs can't actively assemble and purchase land. And I'm now thinking, are you going to lobby the government to go further than the Letwin review when they come out with their response after Christmas? It's early in the new year. When they come out with that response, are you going to lobby them to actually reform the Land Compensation Act, which is so out of date and not fit for purpose for now? After all, it was passed in 1961.
Yes, we already are lobbying. And the good news is, not only are we lobbying, and when I last met with the Secretary of State, we lobbied again on this issue in relation to value and land assembly. There are Conservative MPs who also understand the impact it has on housing supply by the ridiculous system of valuation of land. There are examples in London. I mentioned Savills, who said that actually in the value of land, they're now embedded into the value 35% affordable housing. There are examples in Islington, a good example, where the council, in relation to the Holloway prison site, in the local plan, said that the expectation is for half the homes to be affordable to try and keep the price of the land at a sensible level. But we need real reform from government, and we are hoping that MHCLG, the Treasury and others will actually listen to some of the lobbying that we're doing and others doing as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question is from Assembly Member Dismore and relates to the London living wage.
Thank you, Chair. The living wage is a win-win for both employers and employees. For employers, it can help recruitment, retention and productivity. In short, it makes good commercial sense. I was proud to announce during Living Wage Week in 2018 that the London Stadium is now an accredited living wage employer. We're still working to get the pay rise to everyone. This will happen before the end of the year and will be backdated to August. I've always believed it's important to lead by example, and that's why one of my first tasks was to ensure that all GLA staff were being paid the London living wage. I continue to support the living wage campaign and have committed to once again provide them with free advertising space on the TfL network throughout this month to coincide with Living Wage Week. I will continue to urge employers to become living wage accredited through a variety of channels, and especially those institutions such as big businesses, sports clubs and venues, museums and so forth that London has identified with and which can play such an influential role. I was delighted recently when, following a letter I sent, Fulham Football Club announced they would be seeking accreditation. I have also written again to London's other Premier League clubs and will continue to write to other key employers, urging them to do the same. I am deeply concerned about the challenges faced by the large number of businesses in the capital who trade with and recruit from the EU. It is my responsibility to stand up for these businesses, and I'm dismayed that the UK government has failed to help them prepare. Over 80% of living wage accredited employers nationally are already SMEs, and although small businesses are facing many pressures, I have confidence they'll be able to apply the new rate within the next 6 months.
Well, thank you for that. And could I go back to the report of Professor Alston, UN Special Rapporteur, that you mentioned earlier on? Do you agree with his conclusion that the impact of in-work poverty, for example, families with two parents working full-time at the national minimum wage, deceptively rebounded by the Conservatives as a national living wage when it isn't, are still 11% short of what's needed to raise a child, and that this shows the necessity of paying the London living wage, but the proportion of jobs in London paid below the living wage has gone up. They're now being £10.55 per hour. So 1 in 5 jobs, 820,000, are still paid less.
I agree with everything you've said. I think the idea that you can increase people's remuneration by simply rebranding the national minimum wage as the national living wage and expecting things to improve is ridiculous. And that's why I'd encourage all employers to look at the benefits those businesses that pay the living wage have seen in relation to morale, lower sick leave, easier recruitment, retention and progression. It really is a win-win.
And would you also agree with the conclusion of the UN Rapporteur that poverty in the UK since 2010 has been a political choice, and that, quote, austerity could easily have spared the poor if the political will had existed to do so? And given the failure of the Conservatives to address growing poverty, the London living wage is vital to the well-being of less well-off families in London in overcoming the current shortcomings of the social security system, especially the rollout of universal credit across the capital.
Well, absolutely. There is a cause and effect in relation to government announcing policies and the impact it has on the people of our city and our country. And a direct consequence of the budget in 2010 and subsequent budgets from this government has been more people going into poverty than would otherwise have been the case. But also what should worry us is, going forward, the evidence is the continuation of these policies will lead to more people being in poverty than would otherwise be the case. And look, the welfare benefits reform is obviously a sensible thing when it's done correctly and done in a sensible way. We now know from the pilots that universal credit leads to there being more food banks, more rent arrears, more families having problems. Knowing this, rather than the government looking at the evidence and pausing it, they're rolling it out across the country. And that's why it's important for the new Secretary of State to look at the evidence and to do a U-turn on her government's policies in relation to universal credit.
Thank you.
Okay. Assembly Member Boff's question is next, which is on the Green Belt.
Thank you, Chair. The draft London plan provides the Green Belt with the strongest possible protection from inappropriate development. The Green Belt serves multiple important functions for our city. This includes food growing, mitigating the impacts of climate change, preventing flooding, providing important habitats for wildlife, and allowing space for recreation and relaxation for Londoners. I'm committed to preserving it. City Hall has taken a robust approach to refusing development proposals that would cause harm, and any inappropriate attempts to de-designate Greenbelt are not supported. For example, I directed Harrow Council to refuse an application for development where a new sports building would result in harm to the openness of the metropolitan open land that would not be offset by the proposed land swap arrangement. I directed Bexley Council to refuse an application for a rail freight interchange where the proposal involved inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. I directed Barnet Council to refuse an application for a school in the Greenbelt, although I recognise the importance of meeting educational need. The proposed build footprint and the extent of development on Greenbelt land and open space was excessive. Through planning decisions, we're prioritising the protection of the Greenbelt from development that would undermine its role or cause harm. Where required, I intervene in the local plan process where the Greenbelt is being threatened at borough level. London's Greenbelt serves to prevent urban sprawl, driving the reuse and intensification of previously developed land to ensure the city makes efficient use of its land and infrastructure and that inner urban areas benefit from regeneration and investment. This is a key part of the approach of the draft London plan.
Mr Mayor, thank you for those words. Will you formally object, therefore, to Enfield Council's local plan, which includes a local plan consultation, which includes the aim of releasing Greenbelt for development?
If it is the case that the local plan is in breach of our policies, then I would do what I normally do, which is object.
Thank you. Will you also therefore be more flexible when it comes to designating strategic industrial land, especially for those sites located within housing zones? Enfield is using the restrictions of on strategic industrial land as a reason for it now seeking to develop Green Belt.
Well, Chair, I'm happy to look into the details, but strategic industrial land, I think, is quite important in relation to not just the employment needs of our city, but other needs in relation to logistics, planning and other issues. And in general terms, I wouldn't be happy and would normally object if somebody was trying to de-designate SIL. So without knowing the details, I've had to get Jules Pipe talking to the detail, but it's not reached us yet, I don't think, but happy to look into the details.
Your office has already listened to representations from the Conservatives on Enfield Council. I hope it will now listen to the representations from the Labour Party on Enfield Council, which says that this very strict interpretation of strategic industrial land is the motive behind it wanting to look at Green Belt. So I'm asking you to talk to your own party.
Well, Chair, I think with respect, this member's asking me to talk to the Council, and I'm of course happy to talk to the Council, as I do any council, irrespective of party affiliation, if their policies breach what are London policies. And it really is really important for reasons I said to protect Green Belt, particularly if there are other parts of the borough that can be used, and sometimes it means increased intensification, but of course I'll look at the case.
I anticipate that the Labour Party in Enfield will follow the Conservative Party in Enfield's lead. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Arnold and relates to SEND funding.
Sorry, Chair, I just said. Got it. All children and young people should have the opportunity to achieve their full potential and make the most of the opportunity London has to offer. Families are facing real barriers in getting the support that their children need, and parents can often bear the burden of the impact that this has. It's vital that the voices of those who care for children and young people who with SEND are heard. Local authorities have the statutory duty to ensure that children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities SEND receive the support they need. But local authorities desperately need proper funding from central government. Councils up and down the country are already on the brink and are facing a potential funding shortfall of over £500 million. The LGA projects a £356 million funding gap this year alone. That's more than double last year's shortfall. To add to this, the number of children and young people who need SEND support in London is increasing. London councils identified a £75 million shortfall in the high needs funding block in 2017 and 18, and this is only going to get worse. This means that despite their best efforts, schools and local authorities are facing significant budget challenges and at risk of failing to meet their statutory duties. I raised this issue of SEND funding and the increase in demand for support with the Secretary of State for Education in 2018, but also with the current Secretary of State for Education, Damien Hines, last month, and will continue to make the case for an increased funding for children and young people with SEND.
Thank you for that, and your that really good reply, and it shows that you are fully aware of it and know that this is an issue that is certainly not going to go away. And just putting numbers on the stats, 2,340 more young people of secondary school age, many with complex needs, will be in the system over the next 5 years, and that is without funding. We have here today with us guests of Assembly Member Duval showing their support for this very important issue. It's an issue that is not going away. It's as critical as anything else that we face in London, and I welcome your support, and also to know that the education panel received your response, and that we have put together a submission to the Parliamentary Select Inquiry that's going on, and I shall be endeavouring to get there to speak up on behalf of parents and carers who find themselves in a sense of desolation because there is not the funding available to support their valued children who are as important as any other Londoner. Thank you.
Can I just say what the Senator said is so important. This is about fulfilling the potential of Londoners. and give them the helping hand they need
Absolutely.
to have their potential fulfilled. Deputy Mayor Joanne McCartney is working closely with Deputy Mayor for Hackney, Antoinette Bramble, who's the LGA lead on this area, and met as recently as 3 weeks ago, I think, to discuss this issue at the London Education Officers group meeting. But can I reassure you that we will make sure that we follow up the needs of our city at a time when our city's needs are growing. The resources we have are falling. That can't be right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's the end of questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your answers. Can we quickly deal with the formal matters? Will you agree the motion set out in my name? Thank you very much. Will you note the date of the next meeting? And can I remind you, and this is clearly very appropriately timed, that there is a briefing for members from Streetlink on rough sleeping in room 1.2 West down there. Thank you very much.
GLA